It was the highlight of the year. A packed hall of tech moguls, scientists, and influencers had gathered for one of the most anticipated presentations in the world of innovation. Elon Musk, the billionaire mastermind behind SpaceX and Tesla, stood at the podium, preparing to announce a revolutionary new technology that promised to change the course of human history. The air was thick with anticipation. Musk had been teasing the audience with hints for weeks. His voice boomed across the stage as he spoke about the future of AI, sustainable energy, and the possibilities of interplanetary colonization. He was used to being the center of attention. After all, he was a man who had reshaped entire industries. But nothing, not even the grandest ideas of SpaceX's next-generation rocket technology or the groundbreaking Tesla AI, could prepare him for what was about to happen. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. As Elon launched into the most critical part of his presentation, a small figure, barely visible behind the towering microphones and bright lights, stepped forward and walked straight toward the stage. The audience gasped. Was this a child? Elon paused mid-sentence. The little girl, no older than 6, looked up at him with wide, curious eyes. Her gaze was intense, yet full of innocence, as if she didn't belong in this room, and yet, somehow, she did. She was so out of place, but there was something so magnetic about her that the entire room fell silent. Before anyone could react, she spoke. "I have an idea that will make your rockets fly faster," she said, her voice unwavering, as though she'd been thinking about this moment her entire life. Elon blinked, caught off guard by the unexpected interruption. The crowd shifted in their seats, unsure whether this was a prank, a marketing stunt, or something else entirely. He leaned down slightly, his curiosity piqued. "And how exactly would you do that, young lady?" The girl didn't flinch. She stepped closer, her tiny frame dwarfed by the massive stage and the presence of the world's most brilliant minds in the room. "Well, I've been thinking about quantum propulsion systems," she said, her words spilling out with the ease of someone far older. "You're working on electric engines, but you're ignoring the potential of quantum fields. You need to change the trajectory of how you approach energy in space travel." Elon's eyebrows furrowed. The idea was outrageous, and yet, something in the way she said it felt almost plausible. His mind raced. Quantum propulsion? That was the kind of breakthrough he'd been chasing for years. But how could a 6-year-old know about such an advanced concept? How was she so sure of herself? Before he could process the situation further, a ripple of laughter ran through the crowd. Some people chuckled nervously, while others whispered behind their hands. This was clearly not what they had expected. "Well," Elon began, trying to mask the bemusement in his voice, "perhaps we should discuss this theory of yours backstage." The audience seemed relieved by the return to normalcy, but there was an undeniable energy in the room. Elon Musk, the man who had taken humanity to the edge of Mars, was now standing face-to-face with a child who claimed to have a solution to some of the most complex problems in space exploration. Was this a joke, or was this a moment that could shift the course of history? Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. "This story might just spark a new beginning," Elon said, playfully trying to bring the audience back to the present. "What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?" As the crowd slowly started to murmur and the cameras returned to focus, Elon's eyes stayed fixed on the little girl, who now seemed completely at ease, as though she belonged there just as much as he did. What was the story behind her? How did she know these things? And most importantly, was this just a random moment, or was it the beginning of something extraordinary? Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Lucy Thompson was not your average 6-year-old. In fact, calling her a prodigy would be an understatement. She was a child whose mind moved at a speed that few could comprehend, a mind that was destined to reshape the way the world viewed intelligence. But behind her exceptional brilliance, there was a story that began long before she set foot on that stage in front of Elon Musk. Lucy was born in a quiet suburban neighborhood in Pasadena, California, a place known for its peaceful streets and high-performing schools. Her parents, both academics, were the type of people who believed in structure, discipline, and the power of hard work. Her father, Dr. James Thompson, was a physicist specializing in quantum mechanics, and her mother, Dr. Karen Thompson, was a gifted educator who had taught college-level mathematics for over a decade. Together, they formed an ideal intellectual pairing. But even they couldn't predict the child they would raise. When Lucy was just a toddler, her parents began to notice something unusual. At the age of 2, Lucy could already read and understand books meant for high school students. She recited complex mathematical concepts and could effortlessly grasp ideas that most adults would struggle to comprehend. By the time she turned 3, Lucy had already solved her first complex equation, an algebraic problem that even James, who had written entire papers on quantum physics, had to sit down and work through before he could understand it. Her parents were astounded but also terrified. They knew their daughter was no ordinary child, but they didn't know how to handle her intellect. At first, they tried to keep things normal. They enrolled her in preschool, hoping that interacting with other children her age would give her some semblance of a normal childhood. But that plan didn't last long. Within weeks, it became clear that Lucy was bored. The puzzles and games that were designed for children didn't challenge her in the slightest. When her preschool teacher presented a simple addition problem, Lucy looked up and said, "That's not how you do it. You need to multiply first to make it faster." The teacher, bewildered, tried to explain that multiplication wasn't part of the curriculum for 4-year-olds. Lucy was often the subject of whispers and stares. Other children couldn't understand her advanced language or her need to solve problems that were years ahead of them. She didn't have any friends. Instead, Lucy spent most of her time reading books far beyond her age level or discussing abstract scientific theories with her father. She was a child with an incredible gift, but it felt like a curse. By the time Lucy was 5, James and Karen made the difficult decision to homeschool her. No public school could cater to her needs, and they didn't want her to feel isolated or left behind by her peers. They also knew they had to be careful. Lucy was a sponge. She absorbed information faster than they could provide it. Her parents were both thrilled and overwhelmed. James, who worked long hours at his research lab, often found himself struggling to keep up with her questions. Lucy didn't just ask, why? She asked questions that challenged even his deepest understanding of physics. She was obsessed with the idea of space travel, often asking about the practical limitations of interstellar propulsion, or wondering why humans hadn't yet figured out how to navigate wormholes. It was clear that Lucy had an insatiable hunger for knowledge, but there was a deeper layer to her curiosity. She wanted to solve the problems, not just understand them. One evening, as they sat together at the dinner table, Lucy suddenly asked her father, "Dad, why do rockets need to burn fuel? Why can't we just use energy from the stars? Wouldn't that make it faster?" James nearly choked on his food. He put down his fork and stared at his daughter, his mind racing. It wasn't the question itself. It was the fact that Lucy, at just 5 years old, was asking questions that physicists only dreamt of. He knew the answer to her question. Fuel was needed because of the laws of physics, but Lucy's mind had already jumped to a solution. She wasn't satisfied with the status quo. She wanted to rethink the fundamental principles of rocket science. Lucy's obsession with space exploration grew deeper. She started watching documentaries on quantum mechanics, black holes, and the theory of relativity. Her small bedroom became a war room of diagrams, equations, and books filled with technical jargon. She absorbed it all, and with each new piece of information, she began to piece together a theory that could change everything. But the problem was, she didn't have anyone to talk to about it. Her parents, despite their intelligence, didn't have the expertise in propulsion systems or interstellar physics to fully engage with her ideas. They tried their best, but they could only take her so far. And so, Lucy lived in a world of her own, brilliant, yes, but profoundly alone. At the age of 6, her parents decided to send Lucy to a special advanced program at the California Institute of Technology, where she would be exposed to the brightest minds in the scientific community. They knew it would be a risk. Would Lucy be able to connect with these scientists, or would she once again feel like an outsider? But they couldn't ignore the potential she held. This was no ordinary child, and if they didn't give her the right resources and support, they feared she might burn out, or worse, be lost in a world that couldn't understand her. It was at Caltech where Lucy's name began to spread like wildfire. Professors were astounded by her intellect. She gave lectures on the potential of quantum computers and even began to develop her own theories on quantum propulsion systems. People were shocked that a 6-year-old could be so advanced. But still, Lucy didn't fit in with the other students. They couldn't relate to her, and she didn't understand their world either. One professor, Dr. Helen Abrams, who specialized in particle physics, finally took Lucy under her wing. She saw not just the child prodigy, but the child who needed guidance, support, and most importantly, a place to belong. It was Dr. Abrams who encouraged Lucy to explore her ideas further, to start presenting her work to larger audiences. It was Dr. Abrams who suggested she attend the high-profile tech conference that would bring her face-to-face with the man who would change her life forever, Elon Musk. The room buzzed with an energy that could only be felt at the intersection of technology, ambition, and progress. Elon Musk had just delivered his keynote speech to an audience filled with scientists, engineers, entrepreneurs, and media moguls. They were all hanging on his every word as he painted a picture of humanity's future. A future where Mars wasn't just a distant dream but a new home for mankind. A future where artificial intelligence could unlock the true potential of the human race. It was the kind of vision that only Elon Musk could make seem possible. He had just finished speaking about Tesla's new AI-driven self-driving cars when a soft voice cut through the hum of the crowd. "I can make your rockets fly faster." It wasn't loud, but it was clear enough to stop every conversation in the room. Heads turned, and the eyes of dozens of powerful people who had spent decades in research and development, shifted toward the source of the interruption. Standing in front of the stage, looking up with an intensity that belied her small frame, was a 6-year-old girl, Lucy Thompson. Elon was used to being interrupted. In fact, it was something he expected at every conference. But this was different. The child standing before him wasn't nervous, wasn't stammering, and didn't look the slightest bit intimidated by the sea of experienced minds watching her. There was a quiet certainty in her eyes, a kind of focus that made the room pause in disbelief. For a moment, no one spoke. The room fell into an eerie silence, as if everyone was trying to process the sheer absurdity of the situation. "Excuse me?" Elon said, his voice laced with both curiosity and amusement. He wasn't sure if he was being pranked, or if this was an elaborate setup for a viral marketing campaign. Do you have a name?" The little girl, completely unfazed by the sea of skeptical eyes, looked up at him with wide, focused eyes and replied, "Lucy. I'm Lucy Thompson, and I think I can make your rockets fly faster." A ripple of laughter ran through the crowd, but it wasn't mocking. It was genuine confusion mixed with curiosity. People looked at one another, not knowing whether to laugh or to pay attention. A 6-year-old girl? Talking about rockets? It was the stuff of science fiction. Elon's own eyebrow arched, though he maintained a calm, amused demeanor. "All right, Lucy. What's your idea?" Without hesitation, Lucy took a deep breath and began. "You're using conventional rocket propulsion, right? You burn fuel, creating an explosion to propel the rocket forward. But I've been studying quantum fields. If you can harness the energy emitted by quantum particles, you could drastically reduce the amount of fuel you need. You'd essentially be tapping into a boundless source of energy." Elon blinked, absorbing what she said. "Quantum fields," he repeated, more to himself than to her. "And you think that would make rockets fly faster?" "Not just faster," Lucy replied, her tone growing more confident. "It would make them more efficient. You wouldn't need to rely on chemical propellants. You could create a propulsion system that operates on principles beyond our current understanding of physics." The crowd remained quiet, hanging on every word. Some were skeptical, while others seemed intrigued. Elon, however, was no longer just amused. He was genuinely curious. This wasn't some child babbling about nonsense. She was speaking in terms he understood, terms that most adults didn't fully grasp, let alone a child. "Lucy," he said slowly, his mind racing, "you're suggesting we use quantum energy for propulsion. Do you realize how radical that idea is? You're talking about reshaping everything we know about space travel." Lucy nodded solemnly, as though she were discussing nothing more than the weather. "Yes, but it's possible. I've been reading about the latest developments in quantum mechanics, and I think I can build a prototype that might work." It would need to be tested, of course, but I know it could change the way we think about space travel. Elon couldn't believe it. He had spent years trying to push the boundaries of what was possible with rocket science and AI, and here, standing before him, was a 6-year-old who had just suggested something that could potentially redefine the entire field of propulsion. The idea was so audacious, so out of left field, that it almost felt too good to be true. But then again, Elon Musk was no stranger to impossible ideas. He had built an empire by doing the unthinkable. Maybe, just maybe, this child was onto something. "All right, Lucy," Elon said, his voice lowering to a more serious tone. "Let's say what you're saying is true. How do you propose we even begin to test this?" Lucy smiled, as if she had been waiting for that question all along. "I can show you," she said. "I have my own calculations. I've already mapped out the basics of the quantum energy system. If you have a lab, I'll start working on the prototypes. I need a few resources, but I'll make it work." The idea was preposterous. A child, no, this child, wanted to build a quantum propulsion prototype. And yet, as Elon looked into her eyes, he saw something that few people ever did. A quiet, unwavering belief in the possibility of something bigger. She wasn't just a gifted child spouting off random facts. She was presenting a vision. The crowd waited for Elon to respond. He could feel the eyes of the entire room on him, each person wondering what his next move would be. "I'll tell you what," Elon said, a hint of amusement in his voice. "I'll take you up on your offer. You come to SpaceX. I'll get you access to the labs. We'll see what we can do. But I warn you, Lucy, if this works, the world will never be the same." Lucy didn't flinch. She merely nodded. "I know." And with that, the room erupted into a mix of astonished gasps, whispered conversations, and murmurs of disbelief. Elon Musk, the man who had taken humanity to the edge of space, had just agreed to let a 6-year-old girl test a theory that could change everything. It was a moment no one would forget. The next few days were a blur of activity. Elon Musk couldn't stop thinking about the unexpected encounter with Lucy, a child with an IQ of 210. She had stunned the entire conference, but what she had said, what she had suggested, continued to haunt him. Quantum propulsion. The idea had always been a theoretical concept, something discussed in physics journals but never seriously pursued. Yet here was a child, a 6-year-old, offering a blueprint that could potentially revolutionize space travel. After the conference, Elon had his team pull together everything they could find on quantum propulsion. The problem was that no one had ever figured out how to harness the energy of quantum fields in a practical, usable way. The concept existed, but it was purely theoretical. Still, Elon was intrigued. He had seen people scoff at his other ideas in the past: electric cars, reusable rockets, human missions to Mars, but he had also seen those same ideas change the world. He wasn't one to dismiss something just because it seemed impossible. A few days after the conference, Elon called Lucy and her parents to make arrangements. He offered them a private tour of SpaceX headquarters, and to his surprise, Lucy accepted immediately. Her parents, James and Karen, were understandably cautious, but they were also eager to see where Lucy's theories could lead. They knew their daughter had a special gift, and perhaps this was the opportunity to help her explore it to its fullest potential. The morning of the visit, Lucy and her parents arrived at SpaceX's headquarters in Hawthorne, California. The gleaming modern buildings of the aerospace company stood in stark contrast to the modest suburban home they had come from. Lucy had been to science museums and top universities, but she had never seen anything like the vast scale of SpaceX's operation. "Welcome to SpaceX," Elon greeted them, his usual confident smile a little more thoughtful than usual. "I'll show you around. We can talk shop later, but first, what do you think of rockets?" Lucy's eyes lit up as she gazed at the towering Falcon 9 rocket that stood proudly in the center of the SpaceX headquarters. She was used to seeing models and diagrams, but this was different. This was real. This was the kind of machine she had studied in books, and now it was standing before her, a physical manifestation of the dreams she had only imagined. "It's beautiful," she whispered, "but it's slow." Elon chuckled, surprised by her bluntness. "Slow? Well, it's faster than anything else we've got. That's why we're going to Mars." "I know," Lucy said, a glint of determination in her eyes. But it could be faster, more efficient. Elon raised an eyebrow. And you think your quantum propulsion idea could do that? Lucy nodded, unfazed. Yes, but I need to see the data. I need to understand the material science. If I can get access to the labs, I can start working on it. I've already got the theoretical models in my head. James and Karen watched as Lucy spoke to Elon with an ease that most adults couldn't replicate. They were used to their daughter's intellect, but they still found it astonishing how effortlessly she conversed with one of the most brilliant minds of their time. They followed Elon into the research and development area, a high-tech facility filled with engineers, scientists, and technicians all working toward different goals. It was a hive of innovation, with prototypes of rockets, AI systems, and spacecrafts in various stages of production. The sheer magnitude of it all overwhelmed them, but Lucy seemed perfectly at home. Elon led them to a private conference room where he had gathered a few of SpaceX's top engineers, including Dr. Helen Abrams, the particle physicist who had taken a special interest in Lucy's work. Dr. Abrams, Elon said as he introduced them, this is Lucy Thompson. She's the one with the quantum propulsion theory. Dr. Abrams, who had been sitting quietly at the table, looked at Lucy with a mixture of skepticism and curiosity. As a physicist, she knew that quantum mechanics could yield astonishing breakthroughs, but it was also the most complex and mysterious area of science. If anyone could crack it, it would be someone like Lucy, but the idea of a child solving a centuries-old problem felt almost too surreal. It's nice to meet you, Lucy, Dr. Abrams said, offering a handshake. I've heard a lot about you. So, tell me, how do you plan to start testing your theory? Lucy, without a moment's hesitation, set her bag down and pulled out a small notebook. It was filled with equations, diagrams, and rough sketches. She opened it and placed it in front of Dr. Abrams, who stared down at the pages in disbelief. There were quantum field equations, calculations for energy transfer, and propulsion system diagrams, all of it remarkably detailed and coherent. Elon leaned over, his curiosity piqued. Where did you come up with these? How did you know to think of this? Lucy didn't look up from her notebook. I've been working on it for a while. I just needed the right tools to prove it. Dr. Abrams scanned the pages, flipping through the equations with growing astonishment. She knew that the level of sophistication Lucy was presenting was far beyond what any child her age should be able to comprehend. This wasn't just theoretical. This was real science, cutting-edge, revolutionary science. I think, Dr. Abrams said slowly, that this could work, but we need to test it in the lab. Elon nodded, looking at Lucy with a new sense of respect. All right, Lucy, you've got access. Let's start testing. The team quickly moved to a nearby lab, where the real work would begin. For the first time in history, a child, barely 6 years old, was about to begin experimenting with some of the most advanced concepts in physics. And the future of space travel could depend on what they discovered. As the group set up the equipment, Lucy's parents exchanged worried glances. They were thrilled that their daughter had found people who believed in her, but they couldn't help but feel the weight of the responsibility. This wasn't just a science project. This was the beginning of something far bigger than they could imagine. Are you sure about this? Karen asked Elon quietly. Elon turned to her with a look of quiet confidence. I've seen a lot of things in my life, Karen, but I've never seen anything quite like Lucy. If she says it's possible, I believe her. We'll figure it out. And with that, the team began to work. The tests were about to begin, and the path ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear. Lucy Thompson had just opened a door that could lead to the future of space travel. The lab was eerily quiet. The hum of high-tech equipment was the only sound breaking the silence, a contrast to the bubbling excitement that swirled through the air. This was it. Lucy Thompson, the 6-year-old prodigy with an IQ of 210, was about to take her first steps toward proving her theory. A theory that, if successful, could alter the course of history. Elon Musk stood at the front of the room, his hands clasped behind his back, watching intently as the team of engineers, scientists, and technicians prepared the lab for the first test. Dr. Helen Abrams was there too, closely reviewing the calculations that Lucy had presented. She had, by now, become convinced that the young girl's ideas weren't just the product of imagination. They were grounded in something real, something that could work. Lucy was standing at a workbench, her small hands moving with the precision of someone much older. She adjusted the wiring and calibrated the quantum field generator that had been hastily put together based on her sketches. Her brow furrowed in concentration, but there was no hesitation. She had no doubts. She had always known it could work. She had seen the equations in her mind, felt the patterns in her bones, and now she was ready to bring them to life. "This is it," Elon said softly, mostly to himself. "If this works, it could change everything." The stakes were high, but the room was filled with a strange mix of awe and anxiety. Everyone present knew that Lucy was brilliant, but they also knew that what she was attempting was unprecedented. The idea of harnessing quantum energy for propulsion was decades ahead of current scientific understanding. What if it didn't work? What if the equipment short-circuited or exploded? Or worse, if the quantum field generator malfunctioned catastrophically? The risks were monumental. But even with the weight of the world on her shoulders, Lucy remained calm, her eyes fixed on the controls. "Is everything set up?" Dr. Abrams asked, looking around at the team, who were checking the equipment one last time. "Almost," said one of the engineers, adjusting a monitor. "We're ready for the initial test." "Good," Lucy replied, without missing a beat. "We should start with a low-energy output first. I need to see how the field reacts." "All right," Elon said, stepping forward. "Lucy, are you sure about this? If anything goes wrong?" Lucy looked up at him with a quiet, steady gaze. "I've thought about every possible outcome, Mr. Musk. I'm ready." He hesitated, then nodded. "Let's do it." Elon, Dr. Abrams, and the rest of the team took their positions behind the observation windows, watching as Lucy pressed a button to activate the quantum field generator. The machine hummed to life, its lights flickering as the energy began to flow. For a few moments, nothing happened. The tension in the room thickened as everyone held their breath, watching for any sign of change. Then, it happened. The air around the generator shimmered, as though the very fabric of reality itself had warped. A wave of energy pulsed outward, sending a ripple through the room. The quantum field had stabilized. "Is it working?" one of the engineers whispered, almost too afraid to ask. Lucy's eyes never left the machine. "It's working," she said simply. There was a stunned silence. The field was emitting energy, an unprecedented amount of energy, without burning any fuel, without any chemical reactions. It was clean, it was efficient, and it was beyond anything anyone had ever seen. The quantum field was real, and it was usable. Elon's heart raced. He could hardly believe what he was seeing. It was working, really working. But then, without warning, the machine began to vibrate erratically. The light from the field flickered and began to pulse faster and faster, creating an almost blinding glow. "Lucy," Dr. Abrams shouted, "turn it off. It's destabilizing." In the chaos, Lucy didn't flinch. She had anticipated this. She grabbed the control panel with her small hands, tapping a sequence of keys with precision. Her fingers flew across the screen, inputting commands, recalibrating the system. "Lucy," Elon called out, his voice edged with panic. "We need to shut it down now." But Lucy didn't stop. She was too focused. The energy had reached a critical point, but in that moment, she knew exactly what to do. She had already figured out how to stabilize it. With one final adjustment, she pressed a key with determination. The room went completely still, and then silence. For a long moment, no one spoke. The machine was silent, the quantum field flickering out of existence. The lights in the lab returned to normal. Lucy stood still in front of the machine, her breathing calm, as if nothing extraordinary had just happened. But it had. The quantum field had been activated, and, more importantly, it had been controlled. Elon was the first to speak, his voice barely a whisper. Did it work?" Lucy nodded, turning around slowly to face him. "Yes, it worked." The room erupted into astonished murmurs. The team, the scientists, the engineers, all of them were speechless, staring at the young girl who had just demonstrated the unthinkable. Lucy had just proven the impossible, and now the impossible was a reality. They had harnessed quantum energy. They had created a functional propulsion system that didn't rely on fuel, on rockets, on chemical reactions. Holy crap, one of the engineers muttered under his breath. Elon couldn't help but laugh, a mix of disbelief and exhilaration in his voice. You just changed everything, Lucy. You really did it. Lucy looked up at him, her eyes filled with quiet pride. We did it. But as the excitement of the moment set in, there was a nagging thought at the back of Elon's mind. They had succeeded, but at what cost? The energy released in the test had been substantial. Could they replicate this success without creating an uncontrollable force? The field had been stable, barely, but what would happen if they scaled it up? And there was another question, an even bigger one. If this technology was real, if this could work on a larger scale, the entire foundation of space travel would be upended. The possibilities were endless, but that also meant the risks were enormous. Who would control it? How could they ensure it wouldn't fall into the wrong hands? Elon shook his head, focusing on the task at hand. There would be time to think about the bigger picture later. For now, they had a breakthrough, an extraordinary one, and the world would have to catch up. Dr. Abrams, Elon said, turning to the physicist, we need to move forward with this. We need more tests, more data. But I think we're on the verge of something incredible. Lucy stepped forward, still calm, still centered. We can do it. We just need to be careful. It was a rare moment of vulnerability from the brilliant child. Even Lucy knew that the road ahead would be fraught with uncertainty. The quantum field was unpredictable, yet it was also their key to a future that had once seemed beyond reach. They were standing on the edge of something unimaginable. The world was about to change. The excitement in the lab was palpable. The first successful test of Lucy's quantum propulsion theory had shattered expectations. Engineers were scrambling to analyze the data. Dr. Abrams was writing frantic notes, and Elon Musk, though usually composed, was positively glowing with exhilaration. They had done the impossible. But amidst the rush of triumph, there was an undercurrent of unease, a whispering sense that, just beyond the horizon of their success, lay potential dangers they hadn't yet seen. Lucy, for her part, was unfazed. She stood in front of the quantum field generator, her small fingers skimming over the touch screens as if she were navigating a familiar terrain. She had known it would work. She had seen it, felt it, before anyone else had even begun to grasp the enormity of her discovery. The math had led her here, and the results spoke for themselves. She wasn't surprised. But something about the way the energy had surged during the test, something about the way it had almost gotten out of control, this gnawed at her. I'll need to recalibrate the field stabilizers, Lucy said, her voice cutting through the excitement in the room. Dr. Abrams looked up from her notes, eyes wide. Recalibrate? But, Lucy, your stabilization it was perfect. Not perfect, Lucy replied, her gaze distant. It was close. But if we scale it up, the fluctuations could destabilize the system. We'll need to account for that, or we risk an uncontrolled reaction. Elon, standing nearby, nodded slowly, taking in the weight of her words. You're right. It's still too unpredictable. We need to understand its limits. The team went to work immediately. They ran test after test, each more ambitious than the last, trying to push the boundaries of what they had just uncovered. But despite Lucy's cautious approach, the quantum field generator began to show signs of instability. They couldn't pinpoint exactly why it was happening. Everything in theory was supposed to be sound, but the energy fluctuations were growing larger and more erratic. As the days passed, the team's enthusiasm started to wane. The excitement of discovery was being replaced by a growing sense of dread. The power of quantum energy was undeniable, but the risks were mounting. I don't understand, one of the engineers said, frowning at a monitor displaying chaotic data. We've doubled the power output, but the field's becoming more erratic. Why is this happening? Dr. Abrams, her brow furrowed with concern, shook her head. This shouldn't be happening. Lucy's theory is based on sound quantum mechanics. This is something we've never seen before. Maybe it's too powerful, Elon murmured, more to himself than anyone else. Maybe we're playing with forces we're not ready for. Lucy overheard him and turned to face him. We are ready. I am ready. I understand it, Elon. This is the future. But we have to take it one step at a time. The room grew tense as everyone realized what was at stake. Lucy's unshakable confidence was a double-edged sword. On the one hand, it gave them the hope they needed to continue. But on the other hand, it was clear she wasn't as fully aware of the potential dangers as they were. Lucy, Dr. Abrams said gently, I understand you believe in this, but we need to be cautious. These fluctuations in the field, if they continue, they could cause a catastrophic energy release. We don't know what kind of damage that could cause. Lucy's expression didn't change. I've accounted for the risks. We just need more time to stabilize the energy fields. I'll solve it. But what if you can't? Dr. Abrams pressed. This isn't just an experiment anymore. This is a breakthrough that could change everything. But if it goes wrong? Lucy's gaze softened, but she wasn't swayed. I'm not going to let it go wrong. Elon watched the exchange, torn. He knew that Lucy wasn't trying to be reckless, but she was young, and sometimes, youth blinded people to the consequences of their actions. He had seen it before, brilliant minds driven by an overwhelming desire to change the world, but sometimes those minds didn't fully grasp the gravity of their discoveries. Listen, Lucy, Elon said, his voice steady but firm. We need more time to figure this out. If we rush this, we might be risking more than we can control. We've made great progress, but let's slow down, okay? We need to make sure we understand this system completely before we move forward. Lucy looked at him, and for the first time, a flicker of doubt crossed her face.
But
No buts, Elon interjected, his tone more forceful. We have the potential to change the world, but we need to be responsible about it. We can't afford to act without understanding the full consequences. For a long moment, the room was silent, and the weight of Elon's words settled in. Lucy, for all her brilliance, had no experience with the real-world consequences of her discoveries. She had never felt the pressure of holding the fate of the future in her hands. All right, Lucy said finally, her voice quiet but resolute. I'll take a step back, but I still believe this will work. Elon nodded, though his thoughts were conflicted. They had just scratched the surface of something monumental, but the risks were too great to ignore. They would have to approach this carefully, methodically, even if it meant slowing down. As the team continued to analyze the data and try to stabilize the system, Elon found himself increasingly concerned. The more they tested, the more they realized that the quantum energy wasn't just a new source of power. It was an entirely new realm of physics. And that came with uncertainties that no one was prepared to deal with. Lucy, meanwhile, retreated into her mind, consumed by the challenge. She had always felt different, always known that she was capable of things others couldn't comprehend. The idea of slowing down, of stepping back from her discovery, was frustrating. She couldn't shake the feeling that they were on the verge of something monumental, and the world was just standing by, waiting for them to move forward. But deep down, Lucy knew that Elon was right. They had to be careful. The future they were glimpsing was fragile. One wrong move, and everything could come crashing down. As they continued their work, the tension in the lab mounted. Every breakthrough felt tempered by the possibility of disaster. For the first time in a long while, Elon Musk began to wonder if they were truly ready to harness the future that Lucy had unlocked. The days following the initial quantum propulsion test were filled with frenzied activity, but with a sense of restraint. After Elon Musk's firm insistence to slow down, the team had put the quantum field generator into a quarantine phase, testing, adjusting, and fine-tuning it with the utmost caution. Lucy, though still convinced her theory was the key to revolutionizing space travel, grudgingly agreed to take a step back. She spent her time in the lab, poring over her equations, recalculating, searching for any sign of flaw or missed detail. Yet no matter how many times she checked, everything seemed perfect in her mind. But there was a growing tension. Lucy felt it in the air. The distance between herself and the team. The hushed conversations when she wasn't around. The glances exchanged when she was too absorbed in her work to notice. To the engineers and physicists, she was a prodigy, brilliant, yes, but a child. And children were supposed to be seen and not heard, especially when dealing with something as volatile as quantum mechanics. As the days passed, The quiet restraint that Elon had imposed began to feel more like a cage to Lucy. Every time she glanced up from her calculations, she could feel the weight of uncertainty, of people questioning her. Could they really do this? Was it safe? The quantum field generator sat in the corner of the lab, looking almost dormant. But Lucy could see its potential, could feel the hum of energy just beneath its surface. She wasn't wrong. She knew it. This wasn't just an idea. It was the idea. All she had to do was prove it. One evening, after everyone else had left the lab, Lucy found herself alone in the dimly lit space. She had been staring at the generator for hours, as if willing it to spring back to life. The machine was powered down, its lights dim, but Lucy could sense its potential. The problem wasn't the machine. The problem, she realized, was her need for permission. She walked up to the console, hesitating for only a moment before her small hands began to tap the keys with practiced precision. The air around the machine seemed to change as her fingers danced over the touchpad. For a split second, the room was completely still. Then the humming began. It was subtle at first, almost imperceptible, but it grew louder, stronger. The quantum field generator flared to life with a sudden burst of energy, its blue light illuminating the room with a harsh brilliance. Lucy's heart raced, but she remained calm. She knew what to do. She knew how to stabilize it. The energy output was growing exponentially, but she was in control. At least, that's what she told herself. The equations were running in her mind, guiding her fingers. The power was growing, and with it, her confidence. This wasn't an accident. This was deliberate. This was the breakthrough she had been waiting for. But then something happened that she didn't expect. The power spiked. The quantum field began to vibrate violently, sending ripples through the air. The lights flickered, and the lab walls seemed to groan with the intensity of the energy being released. The generator was shaking on its base, and the humming turned into an unsettling roar, louder, sharper. Lucy's hand hesitated over the control panel, her fingers still poised to adjust the output, but she felt a cold rush of fear. The numbers on the screen flashed faster than she could process. She tried to steady her breathing. "It's fine. I just need to." Then the screen went blank. The machine powered down abruptly. The silence that followed was deafening. Lucy stood frozen, her eyes wide as she stared at the dark console. For a moment, she could barely breathe. Had she just done something catastrophic? The door to the lab suddenly opened, and Elon, Dr. Abrams, and the rest of the team stormed in, their faces grim. Elon's eyes quickly scanned the room, focusing on Lucy and the generator, which was now eerily still. "Lucy." Elon's voice was sharp with concern, his expression a mixture of fear and urgency. "What did you do? What happened?" Lucy, her heart pounding in her chest, slowly turned to face him. She didn't know what to say. She hadn't expected it to spiral out of control like this. She had felt in control, until she wasn't. I was just testing it," Lucy said, her voice wavering for the first time since they'd met. "I wanted to see if I could stabilize it at a higher output. It was working, but then it just spiked." Dr. Abrams approached the console cautiously, her gaze scanning the monitors and readings. "This isn't good. The energy spikes you're talking about, they're off the charts. If we had kept going, we could have caused an explosion." Elon stepped forward, his face tight with a mixture of frustration and concern. "Lucy, this is what we talked about. We can't just rush into things. Do you realize what you were tampering with? You've just pushed the limits of this system in ways that could have ended in disaster." For the first time, Lucy felt the sting of guilt. She had failed, and the worst part was, she wasn't sure if she could fix it. "I thought I could control it," Lucy whispered. "I thought I could stabilize it before it got out of hand. But I didn't. I'm sorry." Elon looked at her for a long moment, his expression softening. He wanted to be angry. He wanted to tell her she had endangered them all. But deep down, he knew that the potential she held was worth the risk. He had seen it in her from the beginning, the brilliance, the raw talent. But now, for the first time, he also saw the weight of what it meant to be in charge of such a breakthrough. "Lucy," Elon said quietly, "this is bigger than any of us. If we're going to move forward, We need to make sure we have full control of the situation. I can't let you take these kinds of risks anymore, not without understanding the consequences." Lucy looked down at the floor, tears welling in her eyes. "I understand," she whispered, "but I can fix it. I know I can." Dr. Abrams, who had been monitoring the system, glanced at Elon. "We need to do more than just fix it. We need to reassess the entire theory. This isn't just a technical challenge, Elon. It's a fundamental flaw in how we're approaching the quantum field." Elon looked at Lucy, his mind racing. "You've created something extraordinary, Lucy. But this isn't a game. We need to tread carefully from now on." The room fell silent as Lucy stood, the weight of her failure pressing down on her small shoulders. For the first time in her life, she felt the crushing burden of responsibility. She wasn't just playing with ideas anymore. She was playing with the very fabric of reality. And the cost of failure was higher than she could have ever imagined. The days after the incident were a blur. The lab, which had once hummed with excitement, now felt cold and sterile, each corner heavy with unspoken tension. Lucy had retreated into herself, isolating herself from the rest of the team. She stayed in the lab late into the night, poring over her equations, trying to understand where things had gone wrong. The quantum field generator was shut down, its lights dim, its once vibrant energy now dormant. But in her mind, the solution was clear. She could fix it. But could they trust her again? Elon Musk had called for a full review of the data, a reevaluation of the theory. It wasn't just about a few adjustments anymore. The entire foundation of their work, the quantum propulsion technology, needed to be reassessed. The stakes were too high to move forward without understanding the potential risks. Lucy, still in shock from her failure, couldn't shake the feeling that something important was slipping away. She wasn't wrong, was she? The quantum theory had been sound. The potential had been there. She had felt it. She knew it could work. But now the world seemed to be closing in on her. Elon sat in his office, staring at the mountain of reports in front of him. Data, calculations, and suggestions from scientists poured in, most of them centered around Lucy's failed test. The energy spikes were dangerous, the fluctuations unpredictable. Every expert in the field had weighed in, and the consensus was clear. The technology was too volatile, but none of them understood. None of them saw what he saw in Lucy. He picked up his phone and dialed Dr. Abrams. "Hey, Elon," Dr. Abrams answered after a few rings, her voice tight. "What's the latest?" "Elon, we need to discuss something," he said, his voice low and urgent. "I've been thinking about Lucy." Dr. Abrams paused. "You're still not sure about moving forward with her work, are you?" "No," Elon replied. "I am sure. But I'm worried about what we're not seeing. We're focusing on the technical side, but Lucy, she's not like the rest of us. She sees things we can't even begin to understand. I've seen her work. I know she can fix this. But we can't keep taking risks like this, Elon," Dr. Abrams countered. "You saw what happened. The quantum field energy nearly went out of control. This isn't something you can just fix with a few adjustments." "I know," Elon admitted. "But we can't throw this away. She's the key. She's the only one who truly gets this. If we shut her out now, we're not just losing a brilliant mind. We're losing the future." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. When Dr. Abrams spoke again, her voice was softer. "I'll be honest with you, Elon. I don't know if I can keep supporting this project if we don't get some kind of assurance that we're being responsible about it. We need time. Time to fully understand what's going on here. If Lucy can't grasp that, I will grasp it," came a small voice from the doorway. Elon and Dr. Abrams both turned to see Lucy standing in the frame, her expression resolute. She had overheard their conversation, but instead of retreating, she had stepped forward. "Lucy," Elon said, his voice a mix of surprise and caution. "What are you doing here?" "I heard what you said," she said quietly, walking into the room. "And I understand. You don't trust me anymore." Elon opened his mouth to protest, but Lucy held up a hand. "You don't have to say anything. I know what I did. I know the risks. I know what could have happened. But I can fix this. I know I can." Dr. Abrams looked at Elon, and then back at Lucy. Her voice was calm, but there was a steeliness behind it. "Fix it how, Lucy?" This isn't just about solving a math problem anymore. The energy we're talking about, it could tear apart more than just the lab. It could tear apart the very fabric of space-time itself. Lucy's gaze didn't waver. I know what I'm dealing with. I've seen the equations in my mind. I've felt them. The key isn't in scaling up the power. It's in controlling the feedback loop. The room fell silent as the words sank in. The feedback loop? Elon asked, his interest piqued despite himself. Lucy nodded. The energy flow is becoming self-perpetuating. What we need to do is create a mechanism that channels and releases the excess energy in a controlled manner. I can adjust the system to have that kind of balance. Dr. Abrams raised an eyebrow. You've thought this through? I have, Lucy said, her voice steady. I understand what happened. The system couldn't handle the rapid increase in energy because there was no safety mechanism. I'll build it. Elon looked at Lucy, then at Dr. Abrams. The weight of the moment hung heavily between them. Could they really trust her? If you can prove it to us, Elon said, his voice quieter now, we'll support you. But you'll need to show us exactly how this new feedback mechanism will work, and we'll need to see it in action before we take any more risks. Lucy's eyes flashed with determination. I'll prove it. The next few weeks were the most intense of Lucy's life. Every waking moment was spent in the lab. The team had given her full access, though with strict supervision, to rebuild the quantum field generator and integrate the feedback mechanism she had devised. Elon and Dr. Abrams had to admit that, despite her age, Lucy's genius was undeniable. Her calculations were sound, but as they moved forward, the weight of their responsibility grew heavier. Elon began to see the full scope of what they were undertaking. This wasn't just a breakthrough in propulsion technology, it was a new frontier in physics. The implications were vast, both for the future of space travel and for humanity as a whole. If they succeeded, they could propel humanity to the stars, solving the energy crisis, making life beyond Earth a reality. But if they failed, the consequences were too horrific to even contemplate. Lucy, however, was focused entirely on the task. Every day, she honed the system, tweaked the calculations, calibrated the stabilizers. But even she could feel the weight of the moment. This time, she couldn't afford to make any mistakes. One evening, as the team gathered around the quantum field generator for the final test, Lucy stood at the console, her fingers hovering above the keys. The lab was silent except for the hum of the equipment and the soft, steady beat of her heart. Are you ready, Lucy? Elon asked, his voice measured but with a hint of apprehension. Lucy nodded, her expression calm. Let's do it. She pressed the button. The generator powered up. The familiar hum of energy began to build. Lucy watched the data closely, her eyes scanning the readouts with intensity. The feedback loop was functioning. This time, it was working as it should. But then, something unexpected happened. The energy output began to rise at an accelerated rate, faster than anticipated. The system was responding, but not as expected. Lucy? Elon's voice was tight with worry. What's happening? Lucy's eyes widened. It's not supposed to. The room was flooded with a blinding light. The blinding light filled the lab, engulfing the team in a moment of pure uncertainty. For a split second, it felt as if time itself had stopped, like they were suspended in a vacuum, cut off from reality. The sound of the generator's humming grew deafening, a low, resonating pulse that rattled the walls and reverberated through their bones. Elon, standing at the edge of the room, instinctively shielded his eyes from the brilliant glow. His pulse quickened as the intensity of the energy output rose. It was supposed to be controlled. Lucy had promised control. But this wasn't control. Dr. Abrams rushed forward, pulling up data on the nearby terminal, her hands flying over the keys in frantic motions. The numbers were climbing faster than anyone could anticipate, too fast. The readings were erratic, spiking in impossible increments. Lucy! Elon shouted, his voice cutting through the hum of the machine. What's happening? Why is it doing this? Lucy, still standing at the console, seemed frozen in place. Her fingers hovered over the controls, but the shock on her face told a different story. She wasn't sure what was going wrong. She should have been sure. I don't know, she stammered. It's supposed to be stable. I didn't This shouldn't be happening. Dr. Abrams shot a glance at Elon, her eyes wide with panic. The feedback loop, it's feeding on itself. We're losing control of the energy stabilization. The room seemed to tremble as the quantum field generator continued to hum louder, faster, the light becoming so bright that it was impossible to see anything clearly. The team's collective breath caught in their throats as the energy readings on the monitors jumped off the charts. "We need to shut it down now," Dr. Abrams yelled, moving quickly toward the emergency stop panel. But before she could reach it, a loud, resonating pulse shot out from the core of the generator. A shockwave that sent everyone stumbling backward, crashing into the walls. A surge of energy flared from the generator's core, rippling through the room in waves of intense, tangible force. It was like a blast of heat from an open furnace, but colder, more unpredictable. The lights flickered wildly, and the once solid air felt like it had turned into a thick fog. Lucy's eyes widened in horror. The theory had been flawless. She had been certain that this was the breakthrough. But what had gone wrong? "Elon," she gasped, her voice strained. I can't control it." Elon rushed to her side, his face set in determination. "We have to act fast. Get the stabilizers back online now." Lucy's hands flew across the console, desperate to regain control. But as the machine pulsed with violent bursts of light, her mind raced. She could feel the pressure building, the energy feeding itself, each burst more unpredictable than the last. There was a moment of clarity amidst the chaos. She saw it. She understood. "This isn't just an issue with feedback," she muttered to herself, her voice barely audible. "It's resonance. The energy is in sync with the field's natural oscillation. It's becoming self-reinforcing." "What does that mean?" Elon asked urgently. "It means," Lucy said, her eyes locking with his, "if we don't reverse the resonance now, the field will collapse. It could implode, or worse." Dr. Abrams, looking over the data, cursed under her breath. "If that happens, we won't just lose the lab, we could tear a hole in space-time. This isn't a simulation anymore, Elon. We need to shut it down before it's too late." But just as they moved toward the emergency stop switch again, the generator emitted another violent surge, this time stronger than before. The lights went out completely, plunging the lab into darkness. The only source of illumination now was the ghostly glow emanating from the machine itself, pulsating erratically like a heartbeat. Lucy stood frozen for a moment, the weight of the situation pressing on her like a physical force. If she didn't act, they would all be lost. The calculations in her head were rapid, each number flickering in her mind faster than her fingers could keep up. She had one last chance to prevent a catastrophe. "Elon, Dr. Abrams, get to the backup power systems. I need to reverse the polarity of the quantum field," Lucy said, her voice steady despite the terror she felt. "Now." Elon and Dr. Abrams exchanged a glance. They had no time to argue. Without hesitation, they sprinted to the back of the lab where the emergency power systems were stored. Lucy, meanwhile, had already begun to adjust the energy flows, recalibrating the quantum fields as quickly as she could. Her hands were shaking, but she focused, forcing herself to ignore the rising panic in her chest. The generator's hum intensified, its energy surging in waves that rattled the room. Lucy's heart pounded in sync with the erratic pulsing. She felt like she was swimming in a sea of raw energy, and every move she made had to be perfect. "Lucy, please," Dr. Abrams shouted from the back of the room. "We don't have much time." "I know," Lucy cried back, her voice barely above a whisper. The room felt like it was vibrating with power, the air thick with the smell of ozone. Finally, with one final press of the console, Lucy hit the sequence that would reverse the field's resonance. The energy output began to drop, slowly at first, then faster, as the quantum feedback loop collapsed in on itself. The light began to dim, the hum of the machine quieting. Then, in an instant, everything went silent. Lucy stood panting, her body trembling with adrenaline, as the last of the energy bled out of the generator. The room, once filled with a chaotic storm of energy, was now still. The monitors flickered, the air settled, and the once blinding light of the machine faded into an eerie glow. The team stood frozen, staring at the now-dormant quantum field generator. They were alive. They had made it through, barely. But the silence was deafening. Elon, his face pale, was the first to speak. What just happened? Lucy swallowed hard, her throat dry, her mind still racing. I almost lost control. But it's fixed. The field is stabilized. It's done. Dr. Abrams walked up to her, her face a mask of controlled shock. You did it, she said slowly. You saved us. Lucy shook her head, her eyes never leaving the now quiet generator. I almost didn't. The weight of what had just transpired hung in the air, each person processing the events differently. For Lucy, it was the realization that she had come close to the edge, not just of failure, but of destruction. She had nearly undone everything they had worked for. But Elon, as always, saw something else. He placed a hand on her shoulder, his voice quieter than usual. Lucy, you were right. The theory was sound. You can control it. But we need to be smarter. We need to slow down. Lucy looked up at him, her face etched with exhaustion. I know now. The room remained still, but beneath the surface, something had shifted. They were standing at the precipice of a breakthrough, but it was clear that the next steps would require more caution, more understanding, and more responsibility than ever before. Elon's eyes never left her, a knowing look settling between them. He had seen what she was capable of. But now, more than ever, he understood the price of pushing the boundaries too far. This was only the beginning. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The aftermath of the generator's near meltdown lingered like a heavy fog. The lab, once a place of excitement and possibility, now felt like a battlefield. The team was scattered, each member processing the events of the last few hours in their own way. Elon Musk, ever the visionary, found himself pacing in the quiet of his office, the gravity of what had almost happened weighing on him. The quantum propulsion technology had been a dream that was now dangerously close to slipping through his fingers. He had believed in it, believed in Lucy. But this close call had shaken him to the core. His mind kept replaying the moment when the lights had surged, the violent shockwave that nearly tore the lab apart. Could they have stopped it in time? Was Lucy truly ready for the responsibility of the kind of power they were working with? The phone on his desk buzzed, pulling him from his thoughts. It was Dr. Abrams. Elon, she began, her voice unusually steady but tired. I think we need to talk about what happens next. He ran a hand through his hair, his thoughts scattered. I know, he muttered. It's a mess. Not just that, she replied. I'm talking about Lucy. She's in the lab, refusing to leave. And I think we both know this has gone beyond a technical failure. It's personal for her. Elon closed his eyes, running through his options. He had never been one to shy away from tough decisions, but this one felt different. Lucy wasn't just another scientist. She was a prodigy. Her mind operated on a level he had never encountered, and with that brilliance came a responsibility that was as heavy as it was profound. I'll talk to her, he said, standing up and grabbing his jacket. We need to find out where her head is at. She can't keep this all inside. She's not just part of the team. She's the key. When Elon arrived in the lab, the door was slightly ajar. He stepped inside, his eyes scanning the room. It was eerily quiet, the once buzzing hum of the generator now replaced by the soft click of keyboards and the occasional murmur of distant voices. Lucy was hunched over one of the workstations, her face bathed in the glow of the screen. Elon, she said, not looking up. Her voice was barely a whisper. I've been going over the data. There's got to be something I missed. There's got to be a way to stabilize the feedback loop, a way to control the resonance without triggering another surge. Elon's not here for the numbers right now, Lucy. Dr. Abrams' voice cut through, joining him in the doorway. He's here to talk about what just happened. About you. Lucy stiffened, but she didn't turn to face them. Her fingers moved restlessly across the keyboard, as if she could erase the moment by burying herself in work. Elon, she said quietly, I nearly killed everyone. I nearly destroyed everything we've been working for. I wasn't ready. No, you weren't, Elon said, his voice low but firm. But you can be. That's the difference. You have the potential to make this work, Lucy. But you're not the only one who's responsible here. We're a team. She finally turned to face him, her eyes bloodshot, her face pale. But I failed. Everything almost fell apart. How can I go back from that? Elon walked closer, his expression softened by a rare vulnerability. He placed a hand gently on her shoulder. We've all had moments where we thought we were too far gone to fix things. But it's not about avoiding mistakes. It's about how you handle them. You've been carrying a lot of weight alone, Lucy. You're not alone in this. Not anymore. For a long moment, there was nothing but the sound of their breathing. Lucy didn't say anything, but the tension in her body began to ease, if only slightly. You're scared, aren't you? Elon added quietly. Scared of failing. Scared of pushing too far. But that's the price of progress. We don't get to change the world by playing it safe. You've got to be willing to take the leap, and sometimes that means risking everything. She swallowed, blinking back tears. I don't know if I can take that kind of risk again. What if I fail again? What if next time, I don't have the chance to fix it? You'll have a team that supports you, Dr. Abrams said, stepping forward. But only if you trust us. Only if you trust yourself. Lucy stared at them both for a long while, the weight of their words sinking in. She had always been the one to solve problems alone, always the one to shoulder the burden. But perhaps it was time to change that. I'm sorry, she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. I didn't mean to. Elon's right, Dr. Abrams interjected. You didn't fail, Lucy. You pushed the boundaries of science in a way few people ever have. That kind of risk? That's what makes the greatest breakthroughs. Lucy's lips trembled as she fought to hold back the flood of emotions that threatened to spill out. For the first time since the incident, she felt something she hadn't in a long time. Hope. Do you think I could still make it work? She asked, her voice small but filled with a fragile kind of optimism. I know you can, Elon said firmly, but we'll do it together. No more hiding. No more going it alone. The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. It was something else, something healing. Lucy nodded slowly, her fingers twitching toward the terminal. There was still work to be done, and this time, she wasn't going to face it alone. She wasn't sure how much longer it would take, or how many setbacks they might face, but for the first time in weeks, she felt a glimmer of certainty deep within her. She could do this. They could do this. The following weeks were a blur of hard work and long hours. Elon and Dr. Abrams worked alongside Lucy, offering guidance and support where needed, but never taking the reins from her. Lucy's mind, once consumed by fear and doubt, was now filled with clarity and determination. She began to realize that the quantum propulsion technology wasn't just a scientific puzzle. It was a representation of everything she had struggled with in her life. Pushing beyond the limits of what others thought was possible, even when the risks were high. But this time, she wasn't doing it alone. As they worked to refine the system, there were moments of doubt, of frustration. There were still setbacks. The energy spikes continued to pose a challenge, but Lucy, this time, knew exactly how to adapt. She knew the risks. She knew how to manage them. And with each small victory, she felt herself growing, not just as a scientist, but as a person. The tension that had once clouded the lab lifted, replaced by a newfound sense of unity. They were no longer just a group of brilliant minds working toward a goal. They had become a team. And in that unity, there was power. Weeks of tireless work and collaboration had led them here, to this moment. The lab was quieter than it had been in days, a palpable sense of anticipation filling the air. The entire team, Elon, Lucy, Dr. Abrams, and a handful of engineers, stood gathered around the quantum propulsion generator, their eyes fixed on the machine that could change the course of human history. The system was primed. The calculations had been reworked, the feedback loop stabilized, and the resonance patterns carefully adjusted. The machine was now as close to perfection as they could make it. The challenge was no longer technical, it was mental. They had to trust each other. They had to trust themselves. Lucy stood at the console, her fingers hovering over the controls. The data on the screen blinked, confirming the power levels, the field stability, the frequency of the oscillation. It was perfect, almost. A slight miscalculation, a single error in the adjustments, and they could end up right back where they started, or worse. "Are you ready?" Elon asked, his voice calm but edged with intensity. Lucy looked up at him. The pressure of the moment seemed to hang between them like a living thing. But her face, once filled with uncertainty, now held a quiet confidence. "I'm ready," she said, her voice steady. Dr. Abrams, standing beside Elon, nodded in agreement. "We've been through worse. This is nothing compared to what we've already overcome. Let's do this." Elon exchanged a look with her. There was no turning back now. They had crossed the point of no return. This was the test that would determine if they had succeeded, or if they had risked it all for nothing. Lucy took a deep breath and slowly pressed the sequence to activate the system. The humming of the quantum generator began to rise, filling the room with the low, vibrating pulse of energy. The air seemed to shimmer with the buildup, the temperature in the lab rising slightly as the fields inside the generator began to align. Seconds stretched into minutes. The numbers on the monitors were stable, but Lucy didn't relax. She had seen stability before, false stability. The tension in the room was thick, every eye fixed on the machine, every breath held. The hum of the generator reached a crescendo, the air vibrating with an intensity that made the floor seem to tremble beneath their feet. This was the critical moment, where everything they had worked for, everything they had dreamed of, either came to life or came crashing down in an instant. Lucy's fingers danced across the controls. She adjusted the frequency slightly, nudging the resonance curve in minute increments, watching as the readings on the screen reacted. It was delicate. One wrong move could send them into another crisis. "Elon, we're almost there," she said, not taking her eyes off the console. Elon's gaze never wavered from the generator. He knew how close they were. His chest tightened, but he couldn't let fear take hold now. He had seen Lucy push past every obstacle, seen the brilliance that had gotten them to this point. "Just a little more," he said, though his voice barely carried above the hum. The pulse of the machine became a steady rhythm, matching the beat of their hearts. The power levels were stable now, the energy feedback loop successfully isolated. The resonance field was holding steady. They were doing it. They were succeeding. But as the seconds passed, something started to shift. The readings, which had been steady, suddenly began to fluctuate. Slowly at first, but steadily growing more erratic. Lucy froze. Her eyes widened, and her hand hovered over the emergency shutdown. "No, no," she murmured, her voice tight with panic. "It's happening again. The resonance is destabilizing." "Elon," Dr. Abrams called, her voice urgent. "We need to initiate the fail-safes before it gets worse." Lucy's hands trembled, but she didn't pull away from the console. Her mind raced, calculating the fastest way to correct the oscillation. There was no time for the fail-safes. If she shut it down now, it would be another failure. A catastrophic one. The world was waiting for this. She was the key. "Lucy, we need to shut it off," Dr. Abrams repeated, her voice filled with urgency. "We're too close to the edge." But Lucy ignored her. Her eyes were locked on the oscillations, analyzing the data in real time, calculating the trajectory of the field. She knew what was happening. She had seen it before, but this time, she had a chance to fix it. She had a choice. "Elon, give me one more minute," she said, her voice steady, but her eyes flickering with fear. "I can stabilize it." Elon was torn. The machine was slipping, the oscillations growing more violent with every passing second. A part of him wanted to listen to Dr. Abrams and pull the plug before they were all consumed by the energy overload. But another part, the part that had brought them here, the part that trusted Lucy, held his breath. "I'm giving you one more minute," he said. His voice was calm, but his heart was pounding in his chest. "And then we shut it down." The seconds ticked by like hours. Lucy was fully immersed in the machine now, her fingers dancing across the console with a precision that seemed to defy logic. Every calculation, every correction was made in an instant. The world outside the lab seemed to vanish. The only thing that existed now was the machine, the energy, and her. For a moment, it felt as though time itself had bent. The air seemed to crackle, the power in the room building in waves that made their hairs stand on end. Every flicker of the screens was another heartbeat in the room. And then, just as it felt like the entire world would collapse in on them, the machine stabilized. The readings flattened out, the erratic spikes gone. The pulse of energy in the room began to quiet, returning to a soft hum. Lucy collapsed into the chair, her body trembling with exhaustion. The team stared in disbelief, their faces pale, their eyes wide. "Elon, we did it," Lucy whispered, her voice raw from the tension. Elon walked toward her, his face breaking into a wide grin. "We did it." It wasn't perfect. There were still kinks to work out, more tests to be done, but they had done the impossible. The quantum propulsion system was finally functional, stable, real. Dr. Abrams stepped forward, her eyes gleaming with something akin to awe. "You've just changed the future, Lucy. We've all just changed the future." Lucy, still trying to catch her breath, looked at the team. It had taken everything from them: sacrifice, fear, failure. But they had succeeded. "I didn't do this alone," she said, her voice growing stronger. "We did this together." The room filled with a collective breath of relief, and for the first time in weeks, the weight that had hung over them all seemed to lift. They had pushed the boundaries of what was possible, and now they had something more important than just success. They had trust, and with that trust, they had just made history. The news spread quickly, like wildfire racing across the globe. The small, nondescript laboratory where Elon Musk and his team had worked tirelessly for years was now the center of the most revolutionary scientific breakthrough in history. The quantum propulsion system had been successfully tested. Humanity was no longer limited by the constraints of conventional space travel. The impossible was now possible. The press swarmed, reporters calling for interviews, media outlets clamoring for exclusive footage, and government agencies starting to make inquiries. It was as if the whole world had suddenly woken up to a new reality. But the excitement of the achievement was tempered by a growing undercurrent of tension. While many celebrated the breakthrough, there were others, those who felt threatened by the implications of such power, who began to push back. Not all the reactions were positive. Not everyone was ready to accept that the world had just shifted into an entirely new era. In the weeks following the successful test, Elon, Lucy, and Dr. Abrams found themselves at the center of a global storm. The media spotlight that had once felt so exhilarating now felt suffocating. Every interview, every phone call, every conversation seemed to come with a hidden agenda. Some saw the technology as a miracle. Others saw it as a weapon. And then there were the powerful corporations, the governments, and the shadowy figures lurking just out of sight, whose interests lay in places no one had yet dared to explore. As much as they had hoped for acceptance, the reality of their success came with a price. Elon sat in his office, staring out at the city below. The weight of the world was heavy on his shoulders. It was always like this, he thought. When you stand on the edge of the impossible, you attract not just admiration, but suspicion. People were already wondering what they could do with this technology, how they could control it, how they could profit from it, or, worse yet, use it to dominate. He picked up his phone and dialed a number. "Dr. Abrams," he said when she picked up, "we need to talk." "What's on your mind?" came her voice, steady but tinged with the exhaustion of the last few days. "It's not just the media anymore," Elon replied. "The calls are coming from everywhere. We have no idea who's behind them. There are whispers. The military wants access. The private sector's lining up for a piece. And there are others, too. People I don't trust. People who see this as a weapon, not a breakthrough." Dr. Abrams was silent for a moment. "I knew it was coming, but we can't let it derail us. Not now. This isn't just about what we've done. It's about what we can do, together, for humanity. We need to stay focused." Elon leaned back in his chair, his mind racing. "We need to control the narrative. If this technology falls into the wrong hands, it could change the world in ways we're not ready for. I'm not talking about space exploration. I'm talking about the kind of power that could reshape everything we know." "I agree," she said, "but we have a responsibility now. not just to ourselves, but to everyone. The technology belongs to humanity, not any one person or corporation. We'll figure out a way to keep it safe. I trust Lucy. She's more than ready to take on the next phase. We can't let fear drive us. Elon paused, considering her words. I hope you're right. I hope we're ready for the consequences. At the lab, Lucy was going through the final analysis of the test results. She had barely slept in the past week, working around the clock to prepare for the next phase of their work. While the quantum propulsion system had been stabilized, there were still countless hurdles to overcome. They needed to refine the technology, improve its efficiency, and ultimately, make it scalable for real-world applications. But as the team focused on their next steps, Lucy couldn't shake the feeling that things had changed. The excitement she'd once felt when the machine had stabilized seemed like a distant memory now, overshadowed by a growing sense of unease. She kept hearing whispers, the kind of whispers that sent shivers down her spine. The technology was too powerful, and the world wasn't ready for it. When Elon and Dr. Abrams entered the room, Lucy looked up from her work. Her face was tired but determined. I've been going over the data, she said, standing up. We're ready for the next round of tests. The machine's stable enough to start experimenting with real-time propulsion. But, Elon raised an eyebrow. But we need to decide what comes next. This isn't just about testing or improving the technology anymore, Lucy said, her voice tight. This is about how we use it, who we give access to, what we're really doing here. I don't think we can move forward until we have a clear answer to that. Dr. Abrams nodded. I agree, but we don't have the luxury of waiting forever. The world's already watching us. The pressure's building. Elon, Lucy said, looking at him earnestly, I'm asking you to consider what this technology could become if it's misused. If it's sold to the highest bidder. If the wrong people get their hands on it, it could be catastrophic. Elon stood silently, his gaze fixed on Lucy. He had known this day would come. The day when the weight of their success would stop being a source of pride and start becoming a burden. But Lucy was right. They couldn't simply keep going forward without acknowledging the gravity of the situation. I know, he said quietly. I've been thinking about that too. I've been getting calls. People are already trying to take control of this. We have to be careful. There was a long pause as the team took in the gravity of the situation. The exhilaration of the success had worn off, replaced by a sobering reality. This wasn't just a scientific achievement. It was a Pandora's box, and they were the keepers of it. So, what do we do? Lucy asked, breaking the silence. Elon turned to face her, his expression resolute. We make the decision now. We don't just share this technology with anyone. We control how it's used. And we use it for something greater than ourselves. We have the power to change the course of human history. But we need to be the stewards of it. I agree, Dr. Abrams said. This is too important. We can't let it fall into the wrong hands. And with that, they made their decision. The quantum propulsion technology would not be handed over to the highest bidder, nor would it be used for military purposes. Instead, they would form a new organization, a global, transparent initiative aimed at using the technology to advance human exploration, to tackle environmental crises, and to solve some of the world's most pressing issues. Their new mission wasn't about power. It wasn't about profit. It was about ensuring that humanity's first step into a new era of space exploration was one that was responsible and ethical. They would lead the way, but they would not lead alone. They would bring the world along with them. As the team finalized their plans, Lucy took a moment to reflect on everything they had achieved. She had come a long way from the insecure, self-doubting child prodigy she once was. And now, as she stood on the brink of an entirely new frontier for humanity, she realized that the real breakthrough wasn't just the technology. It was the realization that together, they could change the world. In that moment, she understood what Elon had meant when he said, "It's not about avoiding mistakes. It's about how you handle them." They had stumbled. They had fallen. But they had picked each other up, and together, they had created something that could change the future. The world would watch what they did next. And Lucy, for the first time in her life, felt ready to face it head-on. It was a crisp morning when the announcement went out. The first public demonstration of the quantum propulsion system was set to take place. The media buzzed with anticipation. scientists, government officials, and investors from around the world descended upon the facility. The world was finally going to witness the dawn of a new age. Elon, Lucy, and Dr. Abrams stood in the heart of the lab, surrounded by technicians and engineers making the final checks. The press conference was set to begin in less than an hour, but the atmosphere in the room felt heavy, as if something unseen was waiting to surface. Lucy stood by the control panel, double-checking the readouts. It was difficult to focus on the task at hand when her mind kept drifting back to the same nagging thought. What's coming for us? She had been feeling it for days now, an unease that hadn't been there before. The technology they had created was too powerful. It was too important. And with its power came something darker, the desire to control it, to use it, to bend it to their own will. Elon had told her that the technology was theirs to safeguard, but she couldn't shake the feeling that they were not the only ones who wanted to wield it. The world's powers were moving fast, too fast. Lucy, Elon called, his voice pulling her out of her thoughts. He was standing by the large screen at the front of the room, scanning through some final data. She crossed the room and stood next to him. "What's going on?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Elon glanced at her, his brow furrowed. "It's the security feeds. Something doesn't feel right. Are we talking about the crowd outside?" Lucy asked, already knowing the answer. She'd seen the tension in the press and the pressuring calls from government agencies. "No," Elon said, his voice darkening. "It's something deeper. Someone's trying to hack into the system." "Not again," Lucy muttered under her breath. The first time it had happened, just weeks before, they'd managed to stop the breach. But now, as the stakes grew higher, so did the risks. "Look at this," Elon said, tapping the screen. A line of suspicious code was flashing in the security logs, one that was entirely unfamiliar. Lucy's heart skipped a beat. "It's a backdoor. Whoever's doing this knows exactly what they're doing." Dr. Abrams, who had been observing from the other side of the room, stepped forward. "We need to isolate the mainframe. Lock everything down until we figure out who's behind this." Elon shook his head. "No, we can't afford to look paranoid. The world's watching us. If we shut down the demonstration now, it'll be seen as an admission of weakness. We'll never recover from it." "But we can't afford to take chances either," Lucy said, feeling a rising tide of panic. "Whoever is behind this knows what they're dealing with. We have to act fast." Dr. Abrams was already at the back of the room, typing furiously into a separate console. "I'm running a trace now. If this is a threat, we'll have them in minutes." The next hour passed in a blur. Outside, the press conference began, with journalists huddled in anticipation, cameras trained on the building. Inside, Elon, Lucy, and Dr. Abrams were locked in a quiet battle with the unknown forces working against them. Lucy stood in front of the large display, watching as the system came online for the demonstration. It was working perfectly, too perfectly. As the clock ticked down to the moment of the public reveal, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The air was thick with tension, each second drawing them closer to a confrontation they weren't fully prepared for. Finally, Dr. Abrams spoke up. "I've got a location on the source of the breach." Elon's head snapped up. "Where?" "A remote server farm in Eastern Europe," Dr. Abrams said, her voice low. "The connection's masked, but it's a sophisticated network. Whoever's behind this has resources." Lucy's stomach churned. "What do they want?" "I'm not sure yet," Dr. Abrams replied, "but the fact that they're going through this much trouble means they're after something bigger than just stealing data." Elon's eyes narrowed. He turned to Lucy. "We can't stop the demo now, but if this is what I think it is, we need to protect the tech from whatever's coming. It's not just about us anymore. It's about ensuring this doesn't fall into the wrong hands." Lucy nodded, a surge of determination flooding through her. "Let's do this. We finish the demo, then we handle the threat." The press conference was underway. Outside, the crowd was buzzing with excitement. There was a palpable sense of anticipation in the air, the type of collective breath held by people waiting to witness history being made. Lucy and Elon stood on stage, facing the room full of reporters and government officials. Dr. Abrams remained behind the scenes, overseeing the technical aspects of the demo. Elon stepped forward, his voice cutting through the noise. Thank you all for being here today. What you're about to witness is the result of years of work, sacrifice, and dedication. This is the beginning of something that will change the future of humanity. Lucy stood by his side, her pulse racing. She could feel the weight of the eyes upon them, the pressure of the world bearing down. This moment, the culmination of all their efforts, was finally here. But so, too, were the dangers that lurked just beyond the horizon. Elon, Lucy, a reporter called out, how soon do you expect this technology to be available for commercial use? And what steps are you taking to prevent misuse of such powerful technology? Elon smiled, though the concern in his eyes remained clear. We are committed to using this technology responsibly. Our goal is not just to create a new era of space exploration, but to ensure it is accessible to everyone, and that it remains in the hands of those who will use it for the benefit of all. The questions kept coming, each one more probing than the last. Lucy fielded questions, her answers calm and confident, but inside, her mind kept racing. Time was running out. Suddenly, her phone buzzed with an urgent text from Dr. Abrams. We've isolated the source. It's someone high up. Be careful. Lucy's heart skipped a beat. Someone high up. She looked at Elon, who had just finished answering another question. Their eyes met for a brief moment, a silent understanding passing between them. It wasn't just the press they had to worry about anymore. There were bigger players at work, people who wouldn't hesitate to do whatever it took to seize control. As the demonstration continued, Lucy felt the weight of the situation pressing down on her. She had made it this far. They had made it this far. But the hardest part was still ahead. In the back of her mind, the same question kept repeating. Who was really pulling the strings? The room was electric with excitement. The media cameras were rolling, capturing every second of the historic demonstration. The quantum propulsion system hummed softly in the background, its potential ready to be unleashed. Outside, the world was watching, waiting for this monumental moment to unfold. Inside, however, the air was thick with tension that no one could quite place. Lucy could barely concentrate as questions and flashing lights from the press kept bombarding them. She kept her eyes flicking to her phone, anxiously awaiting Dr. Abrams' next message. It came in a single, cryptic line. The hacker is someone close, someone with power. Her heart sank. She had feared something like this. They weren't just dealing with random cybercriminals or rogue hackers. Someone powerful, was pulling the strings. Someone who had access to resources, influence, and the kind of reach that could bring down everything they'd worked for. Elon, she whispered, leaning close to him, I think we have a bigger problem than we thought. Elon didn't look up, but his posture shifted, a subtle shift that Lucy knew well. He was thinking, what do you mean? The hacker, she said, her voice barely above a murmur. It's not some random entity. Dr. Abrams just texted me. She's traced the signals. Whoever's behind this is someone close, someone with power. His gaze finally met hers, and for a moment, they shared a silent understanding. This wasn't just about a groundbreaking technology anymore. This was about survival. The next few minutes felt like hours. Questions continued to fly from the media, but Lucy's mind was elsewhere. Every word, every smile she forced, felt like an act. She was no longer in control of the situation. Whoever was pulling the strings behind the scenes had just revealed themselves to be far more dangerous than anyone had imagined. The press conference went on. The crowd cheered as the quantum propulsion system powered up, its engines glowing faintly, preparing for its first public flight. Elon gestured toward the machine, a calmness in his voice as he spoke to the cameras. This is not just an achievement for us, he said. This is an achievement for the entire world. A new era of space exploration begins today. With this technology, we can reach beyond our planet, beyond our solar system, and discover the unknown. This is just the beginning. The crowd erupted into applause. But inside, Lucy could feel the storm brewing. Dr. Abrams' message came a few minutes later, its tone urgent. It's worse than I thought. The hacker signal is coming from a location connected to someone very high up in the government. I've found a link to a defense contractor, someone involved in military research. We're dealing with a corporate government alliance. Lucy felt the blood drain from her face. The military. The government, a defense contractor. They had suspected someone might try to gain control of the technology, but this was worse than anything they'd imagined. They weren't just after the quantum propulsion for commercial use. They were after it to wield power, to control the skies and the stars, on a scale that had never been seen before. Elon, Lucy whispered urgently, leaning close to him once more, this isn't just about our technology anymore. This is about power. Whoever's behind this is connected to the highest levels. We're talking about military contracts, global influence, everything we've tried to avoid. Elon turned to her, his face hardening. He understood now. It was no longer a question of whether they could succeed. It was about whether they could survive. The minutes felt like a race against time. They had to act, and they had to act fast. Elon turned to Dr. Abrams, who had been furiously working on her laptop from the sidelines. Get us access to the systems. We're pulling the plug on everything until we know who's in control. I'm already on it, Dr. Abrams responded, her fingers flying across the keyboard. The system's been compromised. I'm isolating the core files now. But whoever's doing this has access to more than just our data. They're trying to plant a backdoor directly into the propulsion systems. Lucy's stomach twisted in knots. How bad is it? I won't know for sure until I isolate the root cause, Dr. Abrams replied. But if this is what I think it is, we're facing an enemy that can manipulate the system at will. If they get control, Elon cut her off. We can't let that happen. Pull everything offline. Now. The crowd outside continued to cheer as the demonstration approached its climax. The air was thick with excitement as reporters positioned themselves for the best angle, and officials in the back exchanged excited whispers. But inside the lab, everything was going wrong. The quiet hum of the quantum propulsion system was interrupted by the faint whine of the servers beginning to flicker. Elon, we've got a breach, Dr. Abrams said, her voice sharp with panic. I'm losing control. The system is being overridden from the outside. Isolate the mainframe. Elon barked, stepping forward to take control of the situation. Lucy, get to the backup generators. We can't let this technology go live. I'm on it, Lucy said, already turning to sprint toward the auxiliary systems. But before she could take another step, the doors to the lab burst open, and two armed security guards rushed in, followed by a group of men in dark suits. Elon Musk? One of the men said in a voice that was calm, but carried an undeniable authority. Elon straightened. His eyes narrowed as he sized them up. What is this? I'm with the Department of Defense, the man said, showing his badge. We need to take control of the facility. Now. Lucy felt her pulse race. This was it. This was the moment they had feared. Elon, don't let them near the propulsion systems, Lucy said, trying to stay calm. The man gave a tight smile, his hand resting on the holster at his side. We can do this the easy way, or the hard way. For a moment, time seemed to slow down. Elon's eyes locked with Lucy's. She could see the storm in his gaze. They had come too far to let this slip away now. But they couldn't win a fight here. Not with armed guards. Not with the government knocking down their door. Elon, she whispered again, more urgently. We can't fight them here. But we're not done. Not yet. Elon's lips pressed into a thin line, and in that moment, Lucy saw the resolve in him, the defiance. He wasn't going to let them walk away with their technology without a fight, but he wasn't going to start it here. Not in front of the world. Not yet. He nodded sharply. Get the data and secure the backups. We're moving this operation. As the security officers moved in, Elon and Lucy exchanged one final, silent understanding. The battle for the future was far from over. They would fight, but not here. Not now. The night was thick with tension as Elon, Lucy, and Dr. Abrams sat in a small, windowless room deep inside an undisclosed underground facility. The hum of computers, the soft whir of ventilation systems. These were the only sounds in the room. Outside, the world continued as if nothing had changed. But for them, everything had. Elon had made the call to move their operations off the grid. The government had attempted to take control of the propulsion systems, and now their mission was more critical than ever. Safeguard the technology, expose the conspiracy, and stop whoever was manipulating the system from the shadows. Lucy stared at the glowing screens in front of her, her mind racing with a dozen thoughts at once. She couldn't shake the image of the men in dark suits. The men who had come to take their creation, their work, for their own. "We're on borrowed time," Elon said, his voice low. "The Department of Defense isn't just interested in us for our tech. They want to control it. They want to weaponize it." "I know," Lucy replied, her fingers hovering over the keyboard, but not typing. "It's the same thing they've been trying to do with every new breakthrough in the past century. If we don't stop them now, we'll lose everything we've worked for. We can't let them take it. Not like this." Dr. Abrams stood off to the side, analyzing the data that had been saved onto their encrypted drives. She looked up with a grim expression. "Elon, Lucy, I've cross-checked the data. The breach came from a military contractor with ties to the Department of Defense. They're using our system's backdoor to manipulate the propulsion tech, pushing it closer to military applications. If they get full control, the consequences could be catastrophic." Elon's face hardened. "How close are they? Can we still stop it?" "Maybe, but the clock's ticking. They've already infiltrated some of our core software," Dr. Abrams replied, her voice strained. "I'm going to need more time to reverse the changes. If they activate the propulsion system under their control, it'll be game over," Lucy finished for her. "They'll have the power to deploy military assets on a global scale. They can control airspace, space travel, and even weapon systems. Our tech could be used to start wars, or worse, end them." Elon's mind was already working, ticking through potential solutions. "We need to get ahead of them. We need to expose this conspiracy to the public before they can act. We can't fight them directly, not yet. But if we leak the data, we'll need a way to keep them from silencing us first," Lucy interrupted. "The last thing we need is them coming after us again, and this time with no press to witness it." "Agreed," Elon said, his voice hardening. "We're going to play this smart. Dr. Abrams, keep working on the back door. Lucy, I need you to find a way to get that information out. We're going to expose them to the world. No one's going to let them take our tech if we show them the truth." Lucy nodded, but something gnawed at her gut. She felt the weight of the situation pressing on her chest. The world they were trying to protect wasn't just theirs anymore. It was everyone's. And if they failed, there would be no coming back. The next few days were a blur of constant movement. They kept their heads low, moving between safe houses and secure locations. Elon, Lucy, and Dr. Abrams stayed in constant contact with their few trusted allies, people who could help them expose the conspiracy before it was too late. Every minute felt like an eternity. They worked tirelessly to decrypt files, track down sources, and prepare the data that would reveal the full extent of the corruption. It was slow, painstaking work, but it was the only option they had left. "I've got something," Lucy said, her voice a mix of relief and disbelief. She was sitting in front of a laptop, eyes wide as she reviewed the data that had finally come through. "I found the backdoor. I traced the IP address to a facility in Nevada, an underground military base connected to one of the top defense contractors in the country." Elon leaned over her shoulder, his eyes scanning the screen. "That's it. We're close." "Here's the kicker," Lucy continued. "This facility isn't just a research center. They're developing weapon systems that are designed to be powered by the propulsion technology. They're planning to use our systems to launch military satellites and advanced aircraft. If they get full access to the propulsion systems, they'll be able to deploy a global surveillance network. They could control every aspect of communication, transportation, even military airspace." "We have to stop this," Elon muttered, his jaw clenched. "But we can't just break into a government facility and steal the tech. They'll have it locked down." Dr. Abrams, who had been working quietly in the corner of the room, suddenly spoke up. "Actually, we don't need to steal it. We need to expose it. We need the world to see what they're doing before they can act." Elon's plan was simple: release the data, but not just any way. They had to make it unassailable, no way for the government or the military to cover it up. They would leak the files through encrypted channels, but with a twist. Elon had connections in Silicon Valley, in media, and among key political figures. He'd use these to ensure the data went viral. Every journalist, every news outlet, every whistleblower network. The world would know. "We don't have time to be subtle," Elon said, his eyes burning with intensity. "We're going to make sure the entire world sees what they've been doing with our work." That night, as they sat in the dim glow of their screens, Lucy felt a surge of both fear and determination. They were about to make their move. They were about to step into the heart of a conspiracy that could tear apart everything they had worked for. But they couldn't let that stop them. As Elon finalized the last details of the leak, Dr. Abrams tapped her on the shoulder. "We've done everything we can. If they can't stop us now, we'll change the world forever." Lucy looked up at her. "We will. But we're not done yet. There's one more thing we need to do before this goes public." Elon looked at them both, his expression firm. "What's that?" "We need to get out of here. If we're going to take them down, we can't risk getting caught in the fallout." They didn't have much time. The clock was ticking down, and they all knew that once the data was out, there would be no turning back. The government wouldn't let this slip away so easily. The fight they had started was about to reach its climax. As the final file was sent, Lucy felt a rush of adrenaline. They had done it. The truth was now out. But there was no joy in the moment. Only the knowledge that they had just set in motion a battle that would change the world forever. The world was never the same after the leak. The moment the encrypted files hit the internet, the floodgates opened. Social media exploded. News outlets scrambled to report on the explosive revelations. Governments, defense contractors, and military agencies rushed to contain the fallout, but it was too late. The truth was out. Lucy sat in the darkened room, staring at the screen as the numbers rolled by. Millions of views, millions of shares. The data they'd released was now in the hands of the world. The conspiracy, the manipulation of their technology, the weaponization of the propulsion system. It was all there for everyone to see. No one could ignore it now. But with every view, with every second that passed, the danger grew. "Have you seen this?" Elon's voice was low, almost reverential as he walked into the room. He was holding his phone, the screen glowing with the headline, "World in Shock. Space Tech Turned into Military Superweapon by U.S. Government and Contractors." Lucy nodded grimly. "I'm watching it unfold in real time. It's chaos." Outside, the world had descended into a frenzy. Political leaders were scrambling to respond, giving speeches, denying everything, pointing fingers. The military was issuing statements about national security and covert operations. But it was clear that their hold on the narrative was slipping. "Elon, we've set the world on fire," Lucy said, a quiet bitterness in her voice. "But now we're targets. The military won't let this slide. We have to move quickly." He ran a hand through his hair, his face hardening as the gravity of the situation set in. I know it's dangerous, but there's no turning back now. We've exposed everything. We've shown the world what they were planning. There's no way they can sweep this under the rug." The silence between them grew heavy. This was no longer about creating something groundbreaking. It wasn't even about the technology anymore. It was about survival. They had just ignited a global storm. The next few hours felt like days. Lucy's phone buzzed incessantly. The world was reacting in real time. Protests had erupted in major cities. Activists were calling for the resignation of top government officials. Civil liberties groups were demanding accountability. There were even reports of whistleblowers inside the military, ready to testify to what had really been happening. But there was also a darker side. In the shadows, powerful forces were moving. The government, the military contractors, and the defense agencies weren't going to let this go easily. They had far more resources than Elon, Lucy, or Dr. Abrams could ever hope to muster. They weren't going to stand by and let the world learn the truth without a fight. "Lucy, Elon, we need to move," Dr. Abrams called from the other side of the room. She had been monitoring the media, her eyes flicking between news channels and encrypted messages. "The government is already starting to circle. I've got intel. There's a team of military operatives on their way here. We have less than 30 minutes. Elon's face hardened. He'd known the risk from the beginning, but the cold realization that they were truly in the crosshairs of the most powerful people on Earth hit him like a punch to the gut. "We're not sticking around for this. Get the backups, grab what you can, and let's move out." The team had worked out a set of escape routes weeks ago, but now they were put to the test. Lucy quickly grabbed the encrypted hard drives containing all their work. Dr. Abrams made sure the backup servers were properly shut down, while Elon double-checked the communication protocols. Their plan had always been to expose the conspiracy, but now, it was to survive long enough to make sure the data could reach the public, and that the fight they started could continue. They had no illusions anymore. The fight wasn't over. It had just begun. As they moved through the corridors of their underground facility, the weight of their actions settled in. Lucy's mind raced, but she couldn't help but feel a sense of powerlessness. She had dreamed of making a difference, of pushing the boundaries of technology. But now, with the entire world on the edge of war, everything felt out of control. Elon, she hesitated, unsure of how to voice the overwhelming sense of dread that gripped her. I didn't realize it would be like this. I didn't realize that something this big would change everything. We've opened Pandora's box. Elon, ever the visionary, paused and turned to face her. His eyes were sharp, intense. You didn't open Pandora's box, Lucy. You opened the door to a better future. This is the only way. You can't change the world without shaking it up. But you can't stop now. Not after everything we've done. There was a fire in his voice that Lucy hadn't heard in days. His words reignited something in her, reminded her why they had fought so hard. They weren't just fighting for survival. They were fighting for the future. They reached their getaway vehicle, a nondescript van that had been outfitted with the latest tech to evade detection. As they piled in, Elon took one last look at the facility they were leaving behind. The flickering lights of the security system, the faint hum of the air conditioning. It was all that remained of their base of operations. Where to? Dr. Abrams asked, glancing at the maps on her tablet. Elon's eyes hardened. We need to get to an untraceable location. Somewhere far off the grid. Canada? Lucy suggested. Maybe farther. They'll have eyes on us, everywhere. We need to make sure we can keep working. Agreed, Elon said. We need to stay one step ahead. For now, it's about keeping our heads down and pushing the data forward. But make no mistake, we're not done with them. Not by a long shot. As the van sped away into the night, the world outside was consumed by the chaos that had already begun to unfold. In Washington, the White House was issuing emergency statements, trying to quell the growing protests. In cities around the globe, people were flooding the streets, demanding justice. The leak had exposed not just the government's secret operations, but also the lengths to which they would go to control the future. And now, the world was waking up to the truth. But for Elon, Lucy, and Dr. Abrams, the real battle was just beginning. The days that followed the leak were a blur of constant movement, urgent messages, and relentless pressure. Elon, Lucy, and Dr. Abrams had thought they were prepared for what would come after releasing the data, but the reality was more intense than any of them had imagined. They had gone into hiding, retreating to a secluded cabin deep in the Canadian wilderness. It was the only place that felt even remotely safe, a stark contrast to the frantic pace of the outside world. But even here, the shadows of the conspiracy loomed over them. Every rustle of the wind, every creak of the cabin's old wood, felt like the approach of their enemies. The media was in full frenzy. The data had gone viral, and the world was demanding answers. Governments were scrambling to contain the fallout, and military contractors had begun distancing themselves from the technology. But in the midst of the uproar, there was a growing sense of fear. Fear that the leak wasn't just the beginning of a new era of transparency, but the spark that could ignite a global conflict. Elon paced back and forth in the cabin's main room, his mind racing. The world was in upheaval, and while some celebrated the exposure of the military-industrial complex, others were already pushing for a crackdown. He knew the tech they developed was revolutionary, but now it was the center of a geopolitical storm. They couldn't stop the tide. They could only try to stay afloat. Lucy sat at the small table, her fingers hovering over her phone. Every notification, every news update was another reminder of the weight they had set into motion. She was exhausted, physically, mentally, emotionally. But there was a fire in her eyes. She wasn't about to give up. Not now. Any word from the outside? Elon asked, breaking the silence. Lucy looked up from her screen. There's more chatter from our allies in the media, but it's still chaotic. We've got to keep the pressure on. But there are whispers that some factions want to shut us down for good. The government's already drafting new legislation to regulate tech like ours, and it looks like they're coming after anyone connected to the leak. I knew it was coming, Elon muttered, rubbing his temples. I just didn't realize how quickly. We need a plan, an exit strategy, a way to keep our heads down while we make sure this thing doesn't get buried. Dr. Abrams, who had been quietly reviewing encrypted messages on her tablet, looked up. We're not the only ones fighting this fight. The world is waking up. What you've done, Elon, has sparked a movement. People are demanding accountability, but they won't just sit by and wait. They're going to come after us, too. We need to be ready. Elon's eyes narrowed. What do you suggest? Dr. Abrams hesitated for a moment, then spoke with a firm tone. We need to turn this into a movement. We can't just hide here and wait for things to blow over. We need to stay visible, keep the momentum going. This isn't just about survival. It's about changing the world. For good. Elon and Lucy exchanged a glance. The idea of becoming the faces of a global movement was daunting, but they couldn't deny that Dr. Abrams had a point. The world had already chosen its side. There was no going back. Days passed, and the trio worked tirelessly to craft their next move. Their cabin was transformed into a war room. The walls were covered in maps, diagrams, and news clippings. Elon, ever the visionary, had begun reaching out to key figures who could help them spread their message. Tech leaders, scientists, and activists who were aligned with their vision of transparency and responsible innovation. The fight wasn't just about stopping the conspiracy. It was about ensuring that the tech they had created was used for the benefit of humanity, not its destruction. But there was a harsh reality looming over them. They couldn't do this alone. We need to meet with the whistleblowers, Lucy said one morning, after scrolling through a series of messages. We need to get their testimony and make sure the world knows exactly who's behind this. If we can pull together a coalition of insiders, we can bring down the whole operation. Elon nodded. We'll reach out to them. But we need to be careful. If they have any ties to the military or the contractors, we'll be putting them in danger. We don't want to sacrifice anyone else. It was a delicate balance. They had already exposed enough to send shockwaves across the globe, but now they had to ensure their own survival. They were no longer just engineers and scientists. They were whistleblowers in the largest conspiracy the world had ever seen. Every move had to be calculated, every conversation monitored for potential leaks. But despite the constant danger, Elon, Lucy, and Dr. Abrams felt a sense of purpose. They were fighting for something bigger than themselves. They were fighting for the future. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the cabin filled with a warm, amber glow, Elon turned to Lucy. You know, this is a lot bigger than I ever imagined. I never thought that one decision could change the world like this. But I'm not afraid anymore. Lucy's lips curved into a faint smile. You never were afraid of anything, Elon. You just always believed in the potential to change the world. Yeah, he said, chuckling softly. I just didn't realize how much of the world would change because of it. But that's the thing, right? You can't be afraid to change things. Not if you want to build something better. Lucy leaned back in her chair, staring out the window. The world outside seemed peaceful, but she knew it was anything but. The calm before the storm. I've been thinking, she said slowly, her voice barely above a whisper. What if we're not just exposing the corruption? What if we're starting a whole new era? What if this tech is the key to a new world order? One where people don't have to live in fear of what others might do with it. Elon looked at her, his expression thoughtful. That's the dream, Lucy. But we have to be careful. Power like this, it can corrupt just as easily as it can inspire. Dr. Abrams, who had been silently observing the conversation, finally spoke. The world is at a crossroads. You've given people the power to choose which way it will go. That's something only a few can ever say they've done. Lucy smiled at her. You're right, but we can't let the world forget. We can't let them silence us. And so, the days stretched into weeks, and the world continued to react. As planned, Elon and his team pushed forward with their efforts to form an alliance. Whistleblowers came forward, one by one, each contributing vital pieces of evidence to the growing mosaic of truth. The momentum grew, but so did the opposition. Elon, Lucy, and Dr. Abrams knew the stakes had never been higher. But they also knew one thing for certain. They had already started a revolution. A revolution of transparency, of accountability, and of hope. The tech they had created was too powerful to be kept hidden away, too important to be controlled by any one group. It was for the people, and the people were starting to listen. As the first rays of sunlight hit the cabin, the team gathered around one final time. They were no longer just trying to survive. They were setting the stage for something greater. "Let's do this," Elon said, his voice steady and determined. And with that, they stepped out into the world, ready to face whatever came next. The storm that had been gathering since the leak was now in full force. The world had shifted. What began as a localized explosion of truth had expanded into a global movement, a revolution in transparency, technology, and accountability. Yet, as the world's attention remained focused on the groundbreaking revelations, a darker, more dangerous force was slowly circling. Elon, Lucy, and Dr. Abrams had worked tirelessly in the weeks following the leak, forming a coalition of like-minded allies. Whistleblowers, journalists, activists, and influential tech leaders had all come together, rallying behind the cause to expose the vast military-industrial complex that had been manipulating cutting-edge technology for years. The movement had gained unprecedented traction, and calls for accountability were echoing from every corner of the globe. But every revolution comes at a cost. The shadowy organizations responsible for the conspiracy, defense contractors, rogue government agents, and global elites, weren't sitting idle. They had already begun to regroup, using their vast resources to launch a counteroffensive. The fight for control over the revolutionary propulsion technology was about to get far more dangerous. The small, secluded cabin in the Canadian wilderness had long since become a hub of activity. It wasn't just a refuge anymore, it was a command center. Late nights turned into early mornings as the team coordinated efforts across multiple continents, pushing the movement forward. Their encrypted communications channels were buzzing with updates, and the phone lines were constantly ringing with calls from potential allies and threats alike. Elon stood before a large digital map, tracing the connections of various key figures in the global resistance. On the wall, screens displayed the latest developments, news coverage of protests, newly leaked documents, and emerging whistleblower testimonies. "This is getting bigger than we thought," Lucy said, her voice strained. She had spent the last few hours on the phone with activists from Europe, strategizing their next moves. "We've got people on the streets in multiple countries now. It's not just protests anymore. It's organized resistance. But that also means we're in more danger." Elon's fingers hovered over the map, his eyes scanning the pins marking various cities. "The more momentum we get, the more dangerous it becomes. They'll start coming for our people, and they won't just be after us. They'll go after anyone who stands in their way." "I've been hearing whispers," Dr. Abrams added, tapping away at her tablet. "Some of the people we've brought into this coalition, people we thought were on our side, are getting cold feet. They're being threatened, coerced. We've got to figure out who's playing both sides." Lucy felt a chill run down her spine. The realization had hit them hard. The coalition, while powerful, was fragile. Trust was a commodity they could no longer afford to take for granted. "We need to act fast," Elon said, his voice resolute. "We need to solidify our alliances. But more importantly, we need to start planning for what comes next. We can't just keep pushing for more leaks. We need to take the fight to them." Days passed, and the tension in their cabin grew. Elon, Lucy, and Dr. Abrams knew that time was running out. They needed to consolidate their power, or else they risked losing everything. In a series of late-night meetings, they began drafting a plan to infiltrate the heart of the enemy's operations, the very agencies and corporations that had been exploiting the propulsion technology. They would need to strike at the source. "We'll need to get inside their systems," Lucy said, leaning over a whiteboard covered in complex algorithms and security protocols. "There's no way we can just keep leaking information. We need to take control of their assets, hijack their tech, their resources, and expose them once and for all." Dr. Abrams looked up from her screen. "It's risky. We're not just exposing them anymore. We'll be in direct conflict with them. These are people who have access to military-grade tech and resources." Elon nodded. "But we're already at war. They just don't know it yet. If we don't act, the movement loses steam, and the truth will be buried again. The plan was set into motion. With the help of their most trusted allies, Elon and Lucy began devising a way to infiltrate the highest levels of the military-industrial complex. They would hack into the contractors' databases, expose their illegal operations, and free the tech that had been weaponized. But there was a problem. A few days into the operation, Elon received a call that would change everything. The message was brief, encrypted, and delivered in a voice he barely recognized. "Elon, it's me. We need to talk. It's about Lucy. You've been compromised." Elon's heart raced. He leaned against the wall, struggling to absorb what he had just heard. The voice on the other end of the line was the last person he expected. One of their most trusted allies, a former tech officer who had been instrumental in gathering intelligence. "Explain," Elon said, his voice tight. "You've got a mole," the officer replied. "Someone in your coalition is working for the other side. They've been leaking information to the contractors, and they've got Lucy in their sights." Elon's blood ran cold. His mind immediately raced to the most important question. Who could it be? Lucy had always been his most trusted partner. They had been through too much together for him to even consider the possibility that she could be compromised. But as the officer's words hung in the air, doubt began to creep in. "What do you want me to do?" Elon asked, his mind already spinning with plans. "You've got to move quickly," the officer warned. "They're close. Whoever it is has already made contact with them. You need to cut ties with everyone, except for Lucy and Dr. Abrams, and trust no one else." In the hours that followed, Elon's sense of paranoia grew. Every phone call felt like a trap. Every ally seemed like a potential threat. He couldn't trust anyone, not even the people closest to him. As he stared at the cabin's walls, his mind racing with possibilities, a new realization hit him. They were all in too deep. They'd never be able to escape it now. "Lucy," he said, his voice tight. "We need to talk." The confrontation came soon after. Elon and Lucy sat alone in a small room, far away from the others. The silence between them was thick, filled with unspoken tension. "Lucy, I need to ask you something," Elon began, his eyes locked on hers. "There's a leak. I need to know. Are you working for them?" Lucy froze. The color drained from her face. "What?" she whispered, the shock in her voice genuine. "Elon, what are you talking about?" He exhaled slowly, trying to steady his nerves. "I don't want to believe it, but I have to know. We've been told there's a mole in the group. Someone's been feeding information to the contractors. And if it's you..." She shook her head vigorously. "No, Elon. I swear, I haven't. I haven't done anything like that." The weight of his words hit her hard. She could see the doubt in his eyes, and she knew how dangerous it was for him to question her loyalty. But she also knew something even darker was at play. Whoever had planted this seed of doubt in his mind had done it with one purpose: to destroy the trust between them. "I don't know who's behind this," she said, voice trembling, "but I'm not the mole. I'm with you. I've always been with you." The silence between Elon and Lucy was unbearable. The trust that had been the foundation of their partnership now seemed fragile, like a delicate glass teetering on the edge of a precipice. Elon could see the fear in Lucy's eyes, but that didn't ease the tension building in his chest. The weight of the accusation hung in the air, suffocating them both. Could it really be her? "Elon," Lucy's voice cracked as she tried to reach him, but the raw emotion in her words only made him pull further away. "You know me. You know what I've sacrificed. Why would I?" He shook his head, rubbing his temples, trying to push the thoughts from his mind. "I don't know, Lucy. I don't know what to believe anymore." The room seemed to close in on them, the walls narrowing with each passing second. The cabin, once a sanctuary, now felt like a trap. Lucy stood, her movements sharp. "We can't let this ruin us. Not now. Not when we've come so far." Elon stared at her, searching her face for any sign of deception. But the doubt was already there, gnawing at the edges of his mind. Who had told him about the mole? Why would they single out Lucy? Was it true? Or was this just another strategy to divide them, to break their resolve from within? Lucy stepped closer, her eyes pleading. You've always believed in me. In what we're doing. This isn't the time for this. We're fighting something bigger than ourselves, bigger than any one person. The real enemy is out there, not in here. But Elon couldn't shake the feeling. He couldn't ignore the voice in his head screaming that they were all being manipulated by forces they had no control over, forces they didn't fully understand. Elsewhere in the cabin, Dr. Abrams was deep in thought, going over encrypted data from their most recent operation. The pressure was mounting, and the feeling of being watched was ever present. She couldn't shake the same doubt that had begun to worm its way into Elon's mind. The news of a mole had shaken her, too. The very idea that someone close to them had been feeding information to the contractors was a nightmare scenario. They had worked so hard to keep their circle tight, to trust only those who shared their goals. But this was different. This wasn't just betrayal. This was a breach that could end everything. She knew that Elon and Lucy were struggling. They were too close, their relationship too intertwined with the cause, to just brush off something like this. Dr. Abrams understood the stakes better than anyone. If they were to survive, they needed to trust one another completely. But trust had become a rare commodity. Back in the room, Lucy's face was pale, her eyes desperate. "Elon, please," she whispered. "You know me. We've been through too much for you to doubt me now." Elon exhaled slowly, trying to steady himself. Her words, her pleading, cut deep, and a part of him wanted to believe her. But the threat was too great to ignore. "I don't know who I can trust anymore. The enemy is everywhere, and we're so deep in this that there's no way out without consequences." "Then what?" Lucy's voice was low, almost pleading. "What are you going to do? You're going to throw it all away? All the people we've helped? All the people who believe in us?" Elon's gaze softened, but the weight of his decision was still heavy on his shoulders. "I don't know what else to do, Lucy." The tension between them broke as the sound of footsteps echoed from the hallway. Dr. Abrams entered the room, her face grim. "We've been compromised." Both Elon and Lucy turned to face her, their expressions a mixture of shock and confusion. "What do you mean?" Elon asked, his voice cold. "I've been reviewing the latest transmissions," Dr. Abrams began. "There's a pattern. Whoever's leaking information, it's not just about you, Elon. It's about all of us. The entire coalition has been targeted. I don't know how, but I know this. They've infiltrated us, and they're watching every move we make." The implications were clear. The mole wasn't just a rogue actor. They were part of a much larger operation. Someone had infiltrated their entire network, planting the seeds of mistrust. The question now was, who? The emotional weight of the situation was suffocating. Lucy, standing at the edge of the room, was no longer just fighting for the truth. She was fighting to prove herself, to show that she wasn't the enemy. And Elon, torn between the woman he had trusted with his life and the weight of the world's expectations, felt like he was being pulled in every direction. "Then what do we do?" Lucy asked, her voice trembling. "We can't just sit here. We need to find out who's behind this. We need to expose them." Elon turned to face her, his eyes hard. "You're right. We can't just hide anymore. But we also can't be reckless. Whoever's behind this, they're playing a game we don't fully understand. If we're not careful, we'll lose everything." Dr. Abrams nodded. "The clock is ticking. We need to act fast. We can't afford to keep second-guessing each other." The reality of their situation set in with cold clarity. They weren't just in a fight for survival. They were in a fight for the future of humanity itself. The data they had exposed, the technology they had uncovered, it was a Pandora's box. And the forces that had worked so hard to keep it closed weren't going to let it remain open without a fight. But in the midst of this, one question echoed louder than any other. Who could they trust? As the days wore on, the team moved with caution. They began to retrace their steps, analyzing every encounter, every meeting, and every communication for signs of betrayal. But the deeper they dug, the more they realized that the mole might not be who they expected. It could be anyone, even someone who had once been one of their strongest allies. Then, the breakthrough came. Lucy had been working late into the night, sifting through security footage of their earlier meetings. Something wasn't right. One of their trusted contacts, a journalist who had been with them from the beginning, had slipped up. There was a moment in the footage, a brief, nearly imperceptible glance, a shift in body language that spoke volumes. It was subtle, but it was enough. She turned to Elon, her face pale but resolute. "It's him," she said. "It's the journalist. He's been feeding them information all along." Elon felt a surge of emotion, relief, anger, and betrayal, all crashing over him at once. The mole wasn't one of them. It wasn't Lucy. But the revelation didn't make things easier. It only made the stakes higher. "We have to move now," Elon said, his voice grim. "We can't let him get away with this." They had found the mole, but the battle was far from over. Now, they would have to confront their former ally, and in doing so, face the even greater battle for the future of the world. The tension in the cabin was palpable, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. The revelation of the mole, someone so close to them, had torn a rift in the foundation of everything they had worked for. But there was no time to dwell on the betrayal. The mission had always been bigger than one person. And now, with the mole exposed, they had to act quickly. Elon stood at the center of the room, his expression grim. His mind raced as he pieced together everything they had uncovered. The leaks, the patterns, the enemies lurking in the shadows. "We've got one chance at this," he said, his voice sharp and unwavering. "We can't afford any more mistakes. We're going after him." Lucy, her face pale but resolute, nodded. "We'll bring him in. We'll make sure he never betrays anyone again." Dr. Abrams clenched her fists, her usually calm demeanor replaced by an edge of urgency. "We've been through hell to get here. The only thing that matters now is getting the truth out. We'll expose everything." The plan was set. They had tracked the mole's movements to a secluded meeting point outside the city, an old warehouse used by the contractors for covert operations. It was dark, remote, and heavily guarded. The perfect place for their final confrontation. Elon, Lucy, and Dr. Abrams moved in under the cover of darkness. Every step was calculated, every decision weighed for its potential consequences. The mole was dangerous. He knew the inner workings of their operations, the vulnerabilities of their communications. He had been a trusted ally, and now he was their greatest threat. As they approached the warehouse, the tension was almost unbearable. The faint hum of electricity, the distant sound of crickets, and the crunch of gravel beneath their boots were the only noises breaking the silence of the night. "Stay sharp," Elon whispered, his voice low and controlled. "We don't know who else is inside." Inside the warehouse, the mole sat in a dimly lit corner, surrounded by crates of equipment and an array of digital screens. He didn't appear worried. In fact, he seemed almost smug, as if he knew they were coming, as if he had already won. Lucy and Dr. Abrams stood at the entrance, their eyes scanning the room for any sign of a trap. Elon was the first to speak. "It's over," he said, his voice cold. "You've been exposed. There's nowhere to hide." The mole turned slowly, his face twisted into a grin. "You think you can stop this? You're out of your depth, Elon. All of you are. You were always too naive to see it." Elon's eyes narrowed. "We trusted you. We gave you everything." The mole chuckled darkly. "Trust is a luxury. I don't need trust. I just needed access. The contractors gave me everything I needed to make sure the world stayed exactly as it is. And now? Now, you've come too close. The truth is out, and there's no turning back." Elon's heart raced, but his mind remained clear. The mole wasn't just working for the contractors. He had been part of the machine, an insider who had manipulated everything from the start. His betrayal was personal, and it cut deeper than any of the team could have anticipated. But as the weight of the moment settled in, Lucy took a step forward, her voice steady despite the emotions churning inside her. "You've made a mistake. You think you're winning, but all you've done is show the world who you really are." For a moment, the mole's expression faltered. The mask slipped, and for the briefest instant, the weight of his choices seemed to hit him. But it passed quickly, replaced by a defiant sneer. "You're too late," he spat. "You've exposed everything, but it's already too late to stop it. The contractors are too powerful. They control everything now. And if you try to fight them, you'll die just like the others before you." Elon stepped forward, his voice unwavering. "You've underestimated us. You've underestimated what we're fighting for. The truth is out now. The world knows what's been done to it. And no matter how much power the contractors have, they can't control the truth forever. Lucy looked at the mole with a mixture of sadness and resolve. You had a choice. You could have joined us. We could have changed the world together. The mole laughed bitterly. I don't need your pity. I'm on the winning side. I've always been. And you're too naive to see that this, he gestured to the screens around him, is how the world works. In that moment, Elon realized something that had been building within him for days. This was never about just defeating the contractors. It wasn't about winning one battle. It was about the world, about the people, the future, the knowledge they now held in their hands. We don't have to win this battle to win the war, Elon said, his voice filled with finality. We've already won, because the world knows. The truth is out, and there's no erasing it. With that, the team moved into action. It wasn't just about confronting the mole. It was about ensuring the truth was cemented, that nothing could stop the revolution they had set into motion. The mole's fate was sealed, but the consequences of his actions had already rippled outward. As they left the warehouse, Elon couldn't help but feel a sense of bittersweet satisfaction. The fight wasn't over. It would never be over. But the world had changed. And even if it didn't happen overnight, the seeds of transformation had been planted. In the weeks that followed, the full scope of their efforts became apparent. The information they had exposed about the military-industrial complex, the propulsion technology, and the secrets buried by global powers had reached every corner of the world. Protests had erupted in cities, governments were forced to make concessions, and the once hidden forces that controlled so much of the world were now under intense scrutiny. Elon, Lucy, and Dr. Abrams had become symbols of the resistance. They were no longer just fighting for a cause. They were fighting for a future where transparency and accountability were not just ideals, but realities. One evening, as the sun set behind the horizon, Elon sat outside the cabin, looking out over the expanse of land they had once seen as their refuge. It no longer felt like an escape. It felt like home, not just for them, but for a new world they had helped shape. Lucy joined him, sitting beside him in silence for a moment, before turning to him. We did it, didn't we? Elon nodded, his eyes fixed on the horizon. We did. But the real work starts now. Lucy smiled, a small, tired smile, but one filled with hope. Yeah, the real work starts now. The final piece of the puzzle had fallen into place. The truth had come to light, and the world was waking up. But it was only the beginning. Elon, Lucy, and Dr. Abrams knew that the road ahead would be long and full of challenges. But they also knew this. They had changed the world. They had taken the first step toward a future that, while uncertain, was filled with the promise of a new beginning. As they stood together, the last rays of the setting sun casting long shadows on the ground, they understood something profound. It wasn't just about exposing the truth. It was about creating a new world from the pieces left behind. And with that understanding, they walked into the future, together. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?